This page of N64 Magazine, issue 37, looks like it's all about the football. The main image is some bloke from International Superstar Soccer 64, shouting his head off. Must be Millennium Edition of ISS 10 they're banging on about. There's a big shout out to Nintendo in 2000 inside, promising pics and info on all the big games for that year, right as we were heading into the new millennium, feeling all futuristic and that. Looks like they've got tips for games like Donkey Kong 64, Super Smash Bros and WWF WrestleMania, all pretty standard N64 fare at the time. Down the bottom there's a bit about Game Boy Color and Planet Game Boy Mag, so they're covering the handheld market too, bless 'em. All in all, typical N64 Mag cover from back then, trying to get you excited about what was coming up and giving you some pointers for the games you were already playing. This page is the contents page for issue 37 of N64 Magazine, dated January 2000. Right at the start, there's a piece called Coming on Kong, talking about Donkey Kong 64, mentioning it might be a bit late for Christmas, but if you got it, you'll know how good it is, and they even put a free game box in the magazine. Bit tight, but alright. Borry. Then there's the news desk section, which is all about Dolphin news. That's what they called the GameCube back then, wasn't it? Apparently they're remembering old rare games and getting close to Yamauchi, who was the big boss at Nintendo, with a "Yuke" comment. Sounds a bit nosy. Coming soon highlights Mario Party 2, Castlevania 2, and more, on Zelda Gaiden, which I guess is Majora's Mask. Always good to know what's coming up. The regulars section just lists boring stuff, like a directory of every N64 game they've covered, subscription info, next issue details, and a wish you were here piece about Forsaken. Bit filler really. Jolgus. Over in N64 Arena they're previewing Ready 2 Rumble Boxing, with a screenshot of some bloke boxing, asking if it's a knockout. Then there's NBA Jam 2000, with the tagline, "Slam dunk the funk all over again. Remember NBA Jam? Madness." Also in the arena section they've got Armorines, which they're calling Starship Troopers on the N64, and Fighting Force, described as a beat-em-up lands in the UK. Those titles sound alright, nothing groundbreaking. Lastly, Import Arena is looking at Toy Story 2, asking if Buzz and his mates make the grade, and Pokemon Snap, the American version of the Pokemon photograph em-up. Toy Story 2 game, yeah, probably decent for the kids. Pokemon Snap, well, that was a bit different, wasn't it? Taking pictures of Pokemon. Brilliant. There's also a small Planet Game Boy section, saying it's the world's only dedicated monthly GB mag, and a little globe character playing a Game Boy. Must have been plugging their other magazine. Overall, standard contents page for the time, hyping up the usual stuff, DK64, coming soon games, and a peek at imports and the arena games. Nothing too exciting, just the usual magazine fodder really. This page from N64 Magazine, yeah, it's a contents page really, innit? Right at the start of the new millennium back in January 2000. Always liked to see what was coming up. Looks like they're teasing a future look at big new N64 games. Typical magazine stuff. Gotta get you hooked from page 6 apparently. Top Gear Rally 2 is there, they were always banging on about that. And Nuclear Strike, remember that one? Atomic Shots apparently. Sounds a bit much, but Action Fest it was. Then, Nintendo in 2000. Well, that was the big thing, wasn't it? New year, new games, all that jazz. They called it vital viewing. Bit dramatic. Blimey, Donkey Kong 64 is splashed all over the page. Massive Great Ape. Huge ultra-secret sealed section. Marketing guff, as always, but yeah, everyone was into Donkey Kong 64 at the time. ISS Millennium is there too. Special investigation into an RPG mode. Must have been clutching at straws to make that sound interesting. It was alright though. ISS. Then you've got the usual bits and bobs. Ultimate Yuletide Buying Guide. A bit late for Christmas, eh? Games on Film. Sounds like they're gonna waffle on about games in movies, probably GoldenEye again, they always did. Then the regular magazine sections, Club 64, Reader Stuff, How to Smash 'em All in Super Smash Bros, and How to Unleash Whoop-Ass in WWF WrestleMania 2000. Gotta love the silly headlines. Mailbox for letters. Tips extra for cheats. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic for when you were stuck. I'm the best, for showing off high scores. Skill Club 64, directory for game info, and back issues and subscriptions at the back. Standard magazine fare really. All there to keep you flicking through, weren't they? This page right then, it's got a future look at some upcoming N64 games. Always exciting back then, weren't they? First up is Top Gear Rally 2, Kemco's Racer. They've got some screenshots. Looks like they're showing off a few tracks. Bit of mud, some snow, desert bits, and even racing through a town. The reviewers talking about needing to brake on corners and not power sliding too much, which sounds about right for a rally game. They mentioned decals getting added to your car as you win, which is a nice touch. Apparently the course design is brilliant, And the desert tracks have rickety shanty towns, which sounds atmospheric enough. There's a little info burst box for Top Gear Rally 2, confirming it's from Kemco, a rally racer, and a hefty 96 megabit cart. 1 to 4 players, rumble pack yes, but no for the controller or expansion packs. Release dates are down as December for the US, February for us lot over here, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 red dots out of 5, so they were clearly quite looking forward to it. Then there's a mention of Nuclear Strike 64, THQ's Chopper Sim, apparently more info on page 8. And at the bottom, it's plugging the Coming Soon section in Planet 64, on page 16, for even more new games. All in all, typical future publishing N64 mag stuff, hyping up the next big things for the console. Good times. This page is about Top Gear Rally 2, on the N64. Yeah, I remember this one. It was billed as absolutely fantastic right from the start, coming from the same people who made Rainbow Six and World Driver Championship on the PlayStation, some decent pedigree there. The review talks about the original Top Gear Rally being a cracker, saying it was one of the first proper races on the N64, even if the backgrounds were a bit bland and it wasn't massively challenging. But it was fun, and this sequel, Top Gear Rally 2, sounds like it's built on that. They're going on about how visually detailed it is, which was a big thing back then, pushing the N64 hardware. The review mentions lifespan engine tinkerage, which sounds like a lot of faffing about with your car, buying and upgrading parts with points you win from races, even down to the tires and onboard computers. Apparently you can even join different racing teams to get more sponsorship. Sounds quite involved compared to just picking a car and racing, eh? The reviewer is saying the handling is superb, you can power slide nicely, and it's precise. They mention different environments like deserts and weather conditions, plus a 4-player mode. They're pretty hyped about the graphics and detail, saying there's no slowdown or graphical loss, which was always a worry on the N64 when things got busy on screen. There's a screenshot of the game showing a purple car, a Ford Escort maybe. It's got a speedometer, and you can see the race time and it's placed 4th. Another screenshot shows some menu options like steering sensitivity and transmission. Below that, there's a little caption saying, "No decals here. Best win a few more races to jazz your car up." Sounds like customization was a big deal. They also mention that if you go off track, you can wreck your electrics if you hit water, or burst your tires if you jump railway tracks too fast. So you have to be careful, not just floor it everywhere. They talk about having to strike a balance between driving fast and cornering sensibly, and repairing your car in races takes up time. It's all about making choices, fix the important bits or leave the minor damage. Top stuff indeed, they say. Quite enthusiastic. They're clearly impressed, reckon it's going to be one of the deepest races ever, and they're looking forward to a full review next issue. They sign off with Vroom. Bit cheesy, but it was the style back then, wasn't it? Yeah, Top Gear Rally 2 seemed like a decent racer for its time. This page is all about Nuclear Strike 64. Right then, looking back at the info burst box, it's from THQ, a 128 megabit cart. Remember those big boys? 1 or 2 players, and it's got all the pack support, controller, expansion, rumble, but no transfer pack for this one apparently. Release dates were January for the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 red blobs and 1 orange, so not exactly setting the world on fire, but decent enough. The article itself is having a chat about the Strike series, Desert Strike, Jungle Strike on the Mega Drive, and SNES. They were massive back in the day, weren't they? This new one, Nuclear Strike 64, it's the first one properly in 3D, something to do with the PlayStation version apparently. They say you're an agent doing missions, protecting convoys, blowing things up, standard Strike stuff then. You're flying an Apache helicopter, armed to the teeth with machine guns and missiles, but you can also drive jeeps, tanks, Harrier jets, all sorts of vehicles, 10 different types apparently. Visually they're not pulling any punches, are they? It still isn't the best looking game in the world, they say. Bit harsh maybe, but then they soften it by saying if you have the expansion pack, you can get better graphics. They mention the compass being handy, and that you can blow up pretty much everything, trees, houses, the lot. Sounds like good, mindless fun for a bit, blasting things to bits. One of the screenshots mentions missiles being powerful but limited, so use them wisely. Another one talks about machine guns being fun but unproductive, and to use the ammo refill at the compound. And another one says you can see items on the map, and the compass will guide you. So yeah, Nuclear Strike 64. Looks like a decent enough chopper blasting game for the N64, if you were into that sort of thing. Not amazing, but could be worse I suppose. This page is from an N64 mag, looks like January 2000. It's previewing Nuclear Strike 64, calling it Strike 64 Mr. Rotivator. in big yellow letters, which is a bit of a mouthful if you ask me. They're showing a bunch of screenshots from the game. It's that classic isometric viewpoint, bit like the old Desert Strike games, which they even mention as a classic camera angle. They reckon it's not bad, which, for back then, it really wasn't. The reviewer talks about how the landscape has hidden bits and bobs, like fuel and ammo, which is standard for these sorts of games. Apparently you need to watch out for civilians too, which could be a bit annoying if you're going for high scores. They're saying early levels are a bit forgiving for blowing stuff up, but later on you gotta be more careful, which is fair enough. They mention it's an enhanced version of the PlayStation original, with smoother textures and better enemy AI. They admit it's not the best looking game ever, but if you had the expansion pack, and who didn't by then, thanks to Donkey Kong 64, it could look pretty decent, sharper than standard mode. They're saying there's no slowdown, and everything's sharper. They expect it to be out sometime in January, and they're hoping to review it in the next issue, assuming everything goes to plan with Power and Light, who are doing the conversion. Standard preview stuff really, stay tuned. There are little captions dotted around screenshots. One mentions destroying bridges to isolate enemy forces, which is a classic mission type. Another says to check the map, which is always crucial in these games. Another one is about blowing up a bridge, because it makes a pretty explosion. A bit childish, but hey, explosions are fun. There's one saying an alert zone is disabled, meaning enemies can't track you, which is useful. And another points out flammable material and health crates in open houses. Standard gameplay tips and observations really. Nothing massively groundbreaking, but looks like a solid enough helicopter shooter for the N64 to keep you occupied. This page of Planet 64 News Desk is all about Nintendo's next console, codenamed Dolphin, and the big news is that they're aiming to get it out for Christmas 2000. Hiroshi Yamauchi, Nintendo's main man, has been doing some talking, saying they want to release Dolphin closer to the PlayStation 2 launch. Bit cheeky considering the Japanese release was meant to be in March, wasn't it? They reckon the slight delay isn't too much of a problem. Apparently Nintendo's trying to fight Sony's PlayStation 2 with some fancy new games, because it's all about the software, innit? They're saying nobody's got their hands on proper Dolphin development kits yet, but a bunch of companies are already working on games for it using souped UPPCs. We also hear that Sapphire, who did Rainbow Six and Top Gear Rally 2, are making a futuristic shooter. Rockstar, those cheeky chaps, are doing Austin Powers games, and Acclaim T-Side are beavering away on Shadow Man 2, plus some secret projects. They reckon these secret games might be based on more Acclaim comics, which sounds interesting. There's also a bit about Trip Hawkins saying it'll be easy to port games to Dolphin from workstations, because it's so powerful. Which is always what they say, isn't it? Yamauchi reckons Dolphin will be cheaper than PlayStation 2, because a machine costing 40,000 yen, or $380, is too pricey for kids, taking a jab at Sony there. They're hoping for an inexpensive wonder machine in a year or so. Keep your eyes peeled for more Dolphin news in the coming months, they say. And there's a little joke asking if Dolphin is the new Mario, fingers crossed and all that. Yeah baby yeah, etc etc. Cheeky sods. This page is from an old issue, back when N64 Magazine was still going strong. It's got a few bits and bobs here. At the top in shortcuts they're chatting about Killer Instinct 3, seems like Rare were being a bit coy about it. Peter Main from Nintendo America was flapping his gums as usual. They're also going on about Pokemon's popularity, mentioning the film being a big hit at the box office, beating even The Sixth Sense, which was quite the thing back then. And then they're boasting about Super Mario 64 Feet being the best-selling N64 game, with Mario Kart 64, Zelda 64 Feet and GoldenEye also doing really well, which we all knew anyway, classics those were. Then there's a section called Dolphin Developer Checklist, that's the GameCube, or Dolphin as it was codenamed. It's listing developers who were supposedly working on games for it. Nintendo of course are doing a Mario game and another Metroid, which is exciting. Rare, bless them, are doing Disney stuff, Killer Instinct 3 and some secret surprises, always with the secrets, weren't they? Retro Studios were apparently doing an American football game. Factor 5, who did Rogue Squadron, were still fiddling with Turrican and maybe Star Wars games. Capcom were on Resident Evil 0, which was a prequel. Acclaim were doing Shadow Man 2, Sapphire were doing a Turok game, and Left Field were on Sports Sims. 3DO, Konami, Codemasters, Ubisoft and Boss Games are also mentioned as being on board for Dolphin games, with titles like ISS, Castlevania, Micro Machines, Batman games, Donald Duck games and Rayman 3 being hinted at. Quite a lot of developers keen to jump on the Dolphin bandwagon, it seems. Next up is Dolphin Speak, and it's all techie talk about the GameCube's processor, which they called Gecko. Apparently it's better than the PlayStation 2's processor and uses copper, something about it being faster at sending data. IBM were helping Nintendo with it, and Konami were using it for ISS games to make the players' faces more realistic, and the movement better, sheesh as they say. Finally, Matza Mass just reiterates how well Super Mario 64 feet sold, nearly 11 million copies worldwide, with Mario Kart 64, Zelda 64 feet and GoldenEye also racking up impressive numbers. Good times for Nintendo, and the N64, eh? It was a decent page, standard N64 mag stuff really. This page of N64 Magazine, issue 37, looks like a typical spread from back in the day. Over on the left, there's a piece about Ant and Dec, those Geordie lads off the telly, doing Pokemon battles in their show. Apparently they were even using GB-like stats on screen, which is a bit of alright I suppose, for kids watching on a Saturday morning. Then there's some news about EA confirming they're doing The World Is Not Enough game for the N64. They're saying it's coming out this month, which would be good news for Bond fans. They also mention Nukem 0 Hour, saying it's taken over development from Eurocom, and that the US version of Nukem is delayed. Doesn't sound too smooth, does it? There's a tiny shortcut section pointing to page 14, probably for cheats or tips, though it's barely worth mentioning. The big thing on the right side is the N64 quiz, with a chance to win 50 quid. 50 quid back then was a decent wedge. The quiz questions are a bit of alright, classic magazine fodder. Questions like, who's the only person who can pull a face and point the camera at the same time? D sounds like a bit of a silly one. There are other questions like, where would you find the armadillo, and what is the first rule of Skill Club? D. Bit random, innit? D. Below that they've got a box clever guide, showing you how to store your DK64 game box, expansion pack and controller pack in the fancy cardboard box it came with. It's a step-by-step guide, with pictures of some bloke looking rather pleased with himself for putting his game bits back in the box. It's all a bit obvious really, isn't it? But I suppose someone might find it helpful. At the bottom, there's a section for sending in your quiz answers, along with your name and address. And they've announced last month's winner as Chester Thomas, from Nottingham. Good for him, 50 quid richer. Overall, standard magazine fare for the time, bit of telechat, game news, a quiz for a few quid, and some basic game storage advice. Kept us entertained, in between actually playing the games, didn't it? This page from the new goods section is showing off some bits and bobs for your N64, mostly Pokemon tat if I'm honest. First up is a Pokemon keychain, which they're saying is too big to be a keyring, and yeah, looking at it, they're probably right. It's got a choice of Pokemon inside: Squirtle, Psyduck, Eevee, Snorlax, Ivysaur, Charmeleon, Blastoise, Pikachu and Poliwhirl, all tucked away in a Pokeball. Then there's a talking Pikachu, which apparently says some daft phrases, office favourites they say, things like just like that, and hello Mr. Overspong. A bit cringe now, but you can imagine kids loving it back then. Next is a Pikachu air freshener for your car, claims to smell of wild Pokemon or something like turtle things, I don't know what that's about. There's also a reversible Pokemon toy, a beanie that turns inside out into a Pokeball. Poliwag is the one they show, they're calling it Pokemon merchandising gone mad, which is probably spot on. Then, a Mad Catz steering wheel. Essential peripheral they reckon, well maybe for some. It's for your driving games, naturally. They say the feel is just right, not too loose, not too tight, but it's made of lightweight plastic, so probably a bit cheap and cheerful, but good enough for a bit of a laugh. They even tested it out on Gear Rally 2, remember that? A decent enough racer from the time. Lastly, there's a Raichu model kit. Sounds like a right faff to put together, they spent ages on it, and the paintwork is a bit dodgy, but hey, it's Raichu firing lightning bolts from his tail. So, a mixed bag of bits for the N64 really. Some might be useful, some less so. Mostly Pokemon stuff mind you, as that was all the rage back then. This page in Retro World is having a bit of a reminisce about games from back in the day. First up they're talking about Donkey Kong 64 getting some pretty decent scores over in Japan, but it sounds like it wasn't quite hitting the same high notes here in Blighty, with Jet Force Gemini and Bomberman 2 also being mentioned as a bit of a letdown in the review stakes. Then there's a bit about Pokemon Gold and Silver. Seems there was a bit of a kerfuffle with an earthquake delaying production, but still sounded like they were shifting a load of copies, with pre-orders going through the roof. They're digging into Night Lore from back in '84 on the Spectrum. That was a proper classic from Ultimate, who later became Rare of course. They were saying it was a real step up back then, with its 3D look and all. Apparently, it was a big deal, almost as big as GoldenEye, and it had things like a day and night cycle, which is still cropping up in games today, even in Zelda, Ocarina of Time apparently, who knew? They even mentioned that clunky rotational control system ended up in Tomb Raider later on, funny that. Lastly, there's a bit about Great Giana Sisters on the Commodore 64, calling it a blatant Super Mario ripoff from '87. Apparently Nintendo got a bit knocked about it at the time, as you would. They go on about how the one-button joystick on the C64 made jumping a bit of a pain compared to the SNES, but back then if you couldn't afford a console, a C64 was your best bet for a bit of second-hand Nintendo magic. They reckon Nintendo got a bit miffed about the whole thing, but it's a decent game in its own right, even if it's a bit cheeky. This page from issue 37 of N64 Mag is all about what's coming soon on the N64, focusing on future releases. Right at the top it's teasing Zelda Gaiden, Castlevania, and Tony Hawk's Skateboarding, all big hitters at the time. New PA. But the main focus is on Mario Party 2. They've got a bunch of screenshots showing off the mini-games and boards. Looks like there's a pirate land board, which seems to be a highlight with everyone dressed as pirates. Quite amusing. There's talk about Wild West and outer space boards as well in the text, so they're clearly going all out on themes this time. Also, there's a Q&A bit where they're asked about unmentioned worlds. They mention a spooky ghost world and a calamari desert-style train track, which sounds a bit odd. They also describe some mini-games, climbing poles while avoiding fish, flying through rings in planes, and a 3-player game on a spinning cylinder. Typical Mario Party madness, isn't it? Apparently there's a grabber minigame too, using a crane to scoop coins. Sounds like the usual collection of daftness. Then there's an info burst table, giving you the lowdown on Mario Party 2. 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, rumble pack is in, but no expansion or controller pack needed. It was out in Yan in the US, April for us Brits, and ages away in December for Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 stars, so they're clearly pretty keen on it. The text itself is building up the hype, saying it's a must-miss game. Sarcastic typo there perhaps? And that it's going to be better than the first one, especially with 64 new minigames and loads of boards. They mention an angry shark in one of the boards, and tell you to get the party snacks ready for April. Sounds like they reckon it'll be another controller destroying, friendship ending classic for the N64, just in time for spring. This page is a preview for South Park Rally on the Nintendo 64 from Planet 64. So, another South Park game then, this time a kart racer. And they're keen to point out it's not ripping off Mario Kart, probably because Mario Kart 64 is a classic, isn't it? Apparently there are a staggering 30 characters, blimey, that's a lot. And 14 scenarios, which does sound quite extensive. They're talking about objectives during races, like a Christmas scenario, where you have to find a Crimbo present and take it to the others. Sounds a bit convoluted if you ask me, but we'll see. The screenshots have got Chef looking a bit stressed, Satan leading a race, and even Terrence and Philip doing what they do best. There's even Cartman dressed as a copper. The reviewer seems cautiously optimistic, especially after that first South Park game which, let's be honest, was a bit pants. They reckon this one might be a winner, though they are holding back the full hype just yet. The info burst box at the bottom gives the tech specs. 128 megabits cart, 14 players, all the pack peripherals except the transfer pack. January release for UK and US, Japan is TBA. 4 out of 5 anticipation dots, so they must think it's worth a look. This page is all about Zelda Gaiden, which we now know as Majora's Mask, a game that was quite hyped back then as the follow-up to Ocarina of Time. There's a Q&A section addressing some burning questions about the game. Someone's asking where Link gets to go, and apparently it's a wintry wonderland, a lush forest and a clock tower. All very Mario 64 feet-like, they say. Another question is about Link's fairy, and apparently, he doesn't have Navi anymore. Instead, there are Navi-like fairies, including some twins called Belle and Mondo. And even an evil Navi. Bit weird that. They also confirm it's set before Ocarina of Time, in terms of timeline, but with adult Link, which is a bit of a timey-wimey thing if you ask me, given Ocarina was all about time travel itself. They also tease a giant beaver in a life preserver, which sounds utterly bonkers. Typical Nintendo, eh? The main article is about getting more details on Gaiden. They mention the moon crashing into Hyrule as the main quest, which is a bit dramatic. Apparently Link has to get masks back from this stall kid who nicked Epona stealing horses in Zelda games. Cheeky. The masks give Link new abilities, like Zora guitar playing or Deku Scrub water walking. Sounds a bit gimmicky, but could be fun. They also mention this alternate Hyrule having opposite versions of Ocarina of Time characters, like Kume being a nice potion seller, and an evil Navi lurking about. Keep an eye out for Odolph with a massive sword too, apparently. The info burst bit at the bottom gives the proper details. Zelda Gaiden is from Nintendo. Obviously it's going to be a 256 megabit cartridge, single player only, no controller or transfer packs, but it does use the expansion and rumble packs, no surprise there to push the N64. Release date is down as Christmas 2000 in the US and March for us Brits, and the anticipation rating is maxed out with 5 red blobs. So yeah, it was a big deal. Everyone was well up for more Zelda after Ocarina, even if the alternate Hyrule stuff sounded a bit strange. Let's be honest, we were all gonna get it anyway, weren't we? This page in N64 Magazine looks like they're previewing a couple of games. First up is EPGA Golf. Seems like they're trying to pitch it as a serious golf sim, unlike Mario Golf, which they admit was still brilliant fun back then. It's got real courses like Druid's Glen and proper golfers blokes like Faldo and Ernie Els. They mention a swing meter, so no surprises there. Says it's from Infogrames, a 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, rumble pack yeah but no expansion pack, out in Feb in the UK. Then there's Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness. Corins, another Castlevania already? This one's called Legacy of Darkness. They're going on about a werewolf character, called Cornell, and a new bloke Henry, who's some kind of knight with a pistol. Apparently he's got to save kids from Dracula in 7 nights. Sounds a bit like hard work. Konami are doing this one. It's on a bigger 256 megabit cart, just 1 player though, rumble pack again but no expansion pack. Says it's out now in the US, Feb for us Brits. They reckon it's gonna be hard, which probably means you'll be swearing at the telly again. They are saying it's like 2 games in 1, whatever that means. They should have a full review next month apparently, so we'll see what they really think then. This page in N64 Magazine seems to be giving us a look at Harvest Moon 64. It's got a Q&A section where they're being asked if it's any good, and the reviewer is saying it's fantastic, even comparing it to the Game Boy version but 10 times better. Apparently there's a lot to do, like 7 types of crops including strawberries, which they seem excited about, 3 kinds of animals, horses, even ocarinas and vineyards. Sounds like they've really packed it in. Rue. They're also talking about finding Moon Mountain and getting married to a manga-style lady, which is a bit of a laugh. And you can have a baby too apparently, once your house is big enough, and you're friendly with the midwife. That's charming. There's an info burst table that looks like a quick fact sheet for the game, mentioning stuff like cart size and controller pack support. It also says it's already out in the US and Japan but TBA for the UK, which is a bit of a tease. Typical. They're saying they'll let us know about converters for PAL tellies, and even print a form for us to beg for a PAL version. Bit desperate lads. The main article goes on about how it's an English translation of the Japanese game, and they were drooling over the Japanese version. It's all about building your farm and getting hitched to one of 5 eligible ladies. Ellie, Maria, Popuri, Anne and Karen. Sounds like a right old soap opera in game form. There's also festivals, horse racing, caves to explore and hidden extras if you're not into the whole marrying thing. But then the Downer Crave, the publishers in the States, are apparently dragging their feet about releasing it here due to economics. They reckon a few letters might help, and they're hoping for a PAL conversion before summer. Fingers crossed on that one then, eh? Looking at the screenshots, it's got that cute, blocky, N64 look. Seems alright for what it is. They seem pretty keen on it, and I suppose if you were into that sort of farming sim thing, it could be a bit of alright. The next page, right then, features a couple of games that were on the horizon back in the day for the N64. First up is Vigilante 8, Second Offense. Seems like Activision was having another crack at the car combat genre. They're talking about vehicle upgrades, which sounds a bit different, and plenty of weapons, including lightning bolts. Mental. Apparently there are 17 vehicles in total, including a limo posh. Shame about the school bus from the first game being locked away though. That was a laugh. Multiplayer sounds like the usual deathmatch sort of thing, brawl, team brawl, and something called Smear, which sounds a bit messy. They reckon it's out around Christmas time. The screenshots look alright, bit blocky as you'd expect, but plenty of explosions, which is what you want in it. Warrior. Then there's Ridge Racer 64, bit of a PlayStation classic, comes to the N64. They're saying it's got all the tracks from the PlayStation Ridge Racer games, plus a few new ones. 24 cars to choose from. That's a decent amount. Sounds like they're a bit worried about the handling, calling it twitchy, which isn't ideal for a racer, but they are impressed with how it looks, especially no fogging, which was a bit of a problem in some N64 racers. Replay mode is meant to be good too. Release date is set for a bit later, around springtime. Screenshots look pretty sharp for the N64, you've got your classic Ridge Racer drifting action going on there. Overall, both games sound promising enough for a bit of N64 action later in the year. This page is all about Tony Hawk's skateboarding game, coming to the N64. Seems like a pretty big deal at the time. They're calling it plank spankingly good, which is a bit much, innit? It's trying to be realistic, saying even average blokes can pull off mad tricks in the game that you'd only dream of in real life without ending up in A&E. They're banging on about linking different moves for combos and using anything as a ramp. Looks like you can skate all over the shop in different locations, even a school campus, and smash through stuff. Apparently there's a 2-player mode too, where you have to nick bits of the level to claim territory. Sounds a bit daft really. There's a bit of a Q&A section where they're being a bit cheeky, asking, "Who is Tony Hawk?" describing him as a 30-year-old bloke who gets paid to roll around on a plank. They also ask if you can get hurt in the game, saying yeah, you fall off, bounce off walls and get a bit of claret on the floor, but get straight back up, so no real worries then. Apparently, it's a conversion from the PlayStation, and it was a big hit over in the States, so they reckon we'll like it, especially if you thought 1080 degrees snowboarding was a bit tricky. Down the side, there's an info burst bit with all the techie details. Cart size is 128 megabit, it's 1 or 2 players, supports the controller and rumble packs but no transfer pack. They reckon it's out in spring for both the US and UK, and they've given it a decent anticipation rating, 3.5 oranges out of 5. Then there's a bit called an ear to the ground, with some other news. Looks like Atlas, who did Snowboard Kids, are bringing Ogre Battle 64 over, which is good news for RPG fans. Something called Paradigm's Harrier 2001 is on hold, which they reckon probably means cancelled. Bit of a shame apparently, as the E3 version looked good. And Nightmare Creatures 2 might not happen on the N64, as the first one didn't sell well in America, and they're not sure if it's worth the effort, even though the first game was supposedly a bit pants anyway with dodgy controls. Oh, and the guys who made Rocket, Robot on Wheels Sucker Punch, are starting work on a new game, a next generation one, using the same physics engine as Rocket, which they said was good. Lastly, they couldn't get any info on the new Bond game, The World Is Not Enough, even though it was announced over in America. Bit cagey, those game publishers. Still, not a bad page of info for a month like January, keeps you vaguely interested in what's coming up. This page is the intro to the magazine's Christmas gift guide. See? It's all about what N64 goodies to ask for, because Christmas is coming around again, and they reckon you might have some Christmas money burning a hole in your pocket. They're thinking about stocking fillers and what to spend gift vouchers on. Typical Christmas stuff really. They've put together what they think is the ultimate Christmas list for your N64 and Game Boy, calling it the Minty Ninty's cream of the Crimbo crop, which is a bit much, isn't it? There's a see-through orange N64 controller dangling there, all Christmassy with some mistletoe. Nice bit of visual flair for the page, I suppose. This page is showcasing the ultimate N64 Yuletide buying guide, back from January 2000 it seems, probably for last Christmas, and it's pushing 4 games as must-haves for the N64. First up is Donkey Kong 64, labelled as must-have. Blimey, 60 quid. Even back then that was steep, they admit it themselves. Apparently it's like Zelda, vast and packed with stuff, and they reckon it's a proper good game, giving it 93% in N64 Magazine. Then there's Super Smash Bros, under Best Beat 'em Up. 40 quid, that's more like it. They mentioned the PAL release being ages after Japan. Typical, but say it was worth the wait. Revolutionary and all that, not really a beat 'em up in the traditional sense, more of a madcap multiplayer brawl, got a 90% score. Next, Resident Evil 2 gets the Best Scarefest title, also £40. Capcom finally got it onto the N64, even though it was already a bit old news from the PlayStation days. Still, they say the N64 version looks great and it's properly scary. Bit strong that crapping from your hair in shockline in it? Another 90% then. Lastly, Turok. Rage Wars is the best multiplayer, and also £40. Apparently it's all about deathmatching, leaving the single-player stuff behind from the previous Turok game. Damn fine gaming experience, they say. Reckon it could rival GoldenEye and Quake. Coming in slightly lower with 87%, but still a blast. So there you have it, the N64 games to ask Santa for, if you had a spare wad of cash back in the day. This page from the magazine is all about Christmas time and getting your N64 goodies sorted. It's got a Yuletide buying guide banner, which is a bit of alright for the time of year. First up is Jet Force Gemini, labelled Best Blaster. Rare, top developers those lads, at £49.99. They reckon it's their best game since Banjo-Kazooie, which is high praise indeed. Sounds like a proper frantic shooter, lots of action and carnage. They mention green bug juice flying about, which sounds a bit grim but par for the course back then. Apparently, the weapons are a joy, and they reckon you'll be playing it for months. They even quoted themselves saying, "You simply must play this." A bit strong maybe, but they seemed well impressed, giving it 93%. Next up is World Driver Championship, Best Racer. Midway, for £40. They say the N64 has been a bit shortchanged on serious driving games, and this is a good un. Gran Turismo-like apparently, with loads of cars and tracks, and nice graphics for the time. Handling takes getting used to, but once you do, it shines. They called it a tire-squealing, rubber-burning, power-sliding thing of wonderment. Bit flowery but alright, 91% from them. Then there's Shadow Man, Best Adventure. Boa. Acclaim, also £40. They pitch it as Zelda-style adventuring, with demons and serial killers. Bit of a change of pace from Link then. set in both the real world and some hellish place called Deadside. Massive 70-hour quest, loads of dark souls to find, and bits of a sacred dagger. Tracking Jack the Ripper in the London Underground, that sounds quite something for the N64. They called it a dark and glittering jewel, which is going a bit far, but another 93% score. Below the game stuff, it's hardware. Says, not bought an N64 yet? Cheeky. They're pushing coloured consoles, transparent ones, for £74.99. Bit pricey for just colours, but I suppose they looked alright. Then there's the DK64 pack, Donkey Kong bundle, £110. Includes the console, controller, Donkey Kong 64 and the expansion pack. Not bad if you wanted all that, but maybe a bit much for just Donkey Kong. Lastly, a Mario 64/GoldenEye bundle for £84.99. Mario 64 and GoldenEye together, can't argue with that for a first-time buyer. Proper classic games. This page from an old N64 mag is having a look at some games for Christmas, both on the N64 and the humble Game Boy. It's calling it the ultimate Yuletide buying guide. A bit strong perhaps, but there you go. For the Game Boy, they're kicking off with Grand Theft Auto, can you believe it? GTA on the Game Boy back then. They say it caused a stir on the PC and PlayStation, and now it's on the little handheld. Apparently it's virtually the same, which is probably pushing it a bit, but still, nicking cars and escaping the old Bill on the go, not bad. Ray. Then there's Mario Golf, which they reckon is even better than the N64 version in some ways thanks to an RPG mode. Bit of a surprise that, but Mario Golf was always a solid game. Stranded Kids sounds interesting, a survival RPG where you catch animals and eat them, and it's got monkeys in it. They're calling it absolute class, bit strong again, but alright. Of course, no Game Boy rundown is complete without Pokemon Red or Blue. They're saying if you haven't got it already, there's no excuse. Can't argue with that really, Pokemon was massive back then, raising your little monsters and battling. They even mentioned this special edition yellow Game Boy Color with Pokemon Yellow, which was pretty cool at the time if you were really into Pikachu. Moving on to proper N64 stuff, there's a bargain hunter section at MVC, remember them? They were flogging music and videos as well, but apparently you could get some decent game deals if you were a member. They found bargains on Rayman 2, which was a cracking platformer, Top Gear Overdrive, always a decent racer, and F1 WGP. Sounds like they were knocking a few quid off, which was always welcome. The verdict for MVC is alright, saying they're good for new releases if you're a member, and want a bit of a discount. Rayman 2 was apparently cheaper there than anywhere else they looked, so not bad if you were after that. They've given MVC a 3 out of 5 rating for bargains overall, so not amazing, but worth a look perhaps. The next page is from an old N64 magazine, looks like they're checking out the bargains at Dixon's and Virgin Megastore for Christmas. First up is Dixon's, remember them? They were flogging off N64 games, calling it Bargain Hunter. They found Mystical Ninja starring Goemon, that's a bit of an oddball RPG wasn't it, for under 20 quid, then even cheaper with a discount. Not bad. F-Zero X, classic racer, and Wipeout 64, another decent racer, were also mentioned. They even pointed out you could get an N64 console for 60 quid, which they reckon is cheaper than a Game Boy, which seems a bit of a weird comparison but alright. They were shifting consoles with games bundled in too, like Jet Force Gemini, Rayman, Top Gear Overdrive, WWF Warzone and Shadows of the Empire, a right mixed bag there, some good, some not so good. The verdict on Dixon's was alright. They weren't expecting much from a chain store, but they were surprised by the older games being cheap. Gave them a 4 out of 5 bargain rating. Not bad at all. Warrington's. Then it's Virgin Megastore, big place for games back then. They reckon the N64 section was massive, much bigger than the Dreamcast stuff. Bargains wise, they found Turok 2, brand new, always a solid shooter, XG2, trying to be Wipeout, must have been cheap for a reason, and Mortal Kombat 4, which they hadn't seen around much, going for 25 quid. They also chucked in a few other cheap games they spotted, like Glover, Hexen and Tetrasphere. Virgin got a 3 out of 5 for bargains. They thought the N64 display was massive, and found a few cheap games. Sounds about right for the time, January sales and all that. This page in N64 magazine is all about where to get your N64 gear. It's a Yuletide buying guide, back in January 2000. First up, it's got a spotlight on Pink Planet Games Exchange. Apparently they're the biggest independent retailer for games in Britain, with 11 shops. They reckon their staff are friendly and have plenty of bargains. Classy indeed, the magazine says with a wink. They're highlighting some bargains you could find at the time. Turok 2 for 13 quid 99, second-hand but good nick. Pilot Wings 64 for 11.99, also second-hand, and Super Mario 64, again second-hand but flawless condition, for 16.99. Those prices seem alright for back then, especially for Mario. The magazine gives Pink Planet a verdict, calling it a real treasure trove. They reckon even new games are a quid or two cheaper, and loads of second-hand stuff, including golden oldies. They even part-exchanged some games Rayman 2, Castlevania and Mission Impossible, and got Jet Force Gemini for just under 50 quid, or a tenner each if you traded them in. They also mention GoldenEye for 20 quid, Doom 64 for $9.99, Biofreaks for $13.99, and Zelda for $23.99. Bargain rating? 5 out of 5 stars. They were clearly impressed. Bashu? Then it moves on to some details about other shops. GameE got 4 out of 5 stars, saying they have a good selection of games, including Blastcore, Silicon Valley, Body Harvest and Forsaken, all for $19.99 each, and World Cup 98 for a tenner. Electronics Boutique, or EB as we called it, gets 3.5 stars. Apparently they are camera shy but have a huge N64 stand, loads of games, and a decent pre-owned selection including a second-hand banjo for 20 quid. Finally, HMV gets only 2 out of 5 stars. They say it's a small N64 stand, but in a good spot in the shop. Bargains are thin on the ground, except for Mischief Makers for 30 quid. Ouch! 30 quid for Mischief Makers, that's steep. There's a little interview with a Vicky from Pink Planet. Apparently, Jet Force Gemini was selling like hotcakes, topping the charts for Christmas. Though Donkey Kong 64 at 60 quid might have been pushing it a bit. Vicky reckons games are a bit pricey generally, which is why older games were still shifting. She was excited about the new colored consoles coming out, hoping for a great Christmas for the N64. Bless her optimism. This page is all about Donkey Kong 64. Blimey, that game was hyped, wasn't it? It's got a big, "How to you? Go bananas in Donkey Kong 64 inches headline right in the middle, like we needed instructions to play a Donkey Kong game. Apparently they've got a 7-page guide inside, which sounds a bit much, doesn't it? They're talking about reuniting the Kong family, grabbing golden bananas, minecarts, and even playing the original Donkey Kong arcade game inside DK64, which was quite neat, I suppose. They're also shouting about tons of Donkey Kong 64 secrets revealed inside, and top secret tips inside, in these little badges, like it's some kind of spy manual. Bit dramatic for a game about a monkey collecting bananas, innit? And they're telling you to only open our special DK64 tips section if you're really stuck. So basically, they're saying, buy our mag to get the secrets, but only look at them if you're rubbish at the game. Right then? It's all very yellow and brown and orangey colors. Very jungly, I guess. And there's a massive picture of Donkey Kong grinning at you, probably because he knows people are still buying magazines in January 2000 to get tips for his game. Madness. The next page is all about Donkey Kong 64, that massive 3D platformer, on the N64. It's got a section called Monkey Business, which is basically a quick guide to some of the core mechanics in the game. They're calling it Monkey Training, and highlight skills like grabbing bananas and coins, which they point out are kept permanently unlike in Banjo-Kazooie, so no need to be stingy with collecting. Then there's Hurting, which is about combat and using moves like the run-and-roll and grenades, and they have a bit of a dig at the irritating crocodiles. Warping covers the warp tiles, tag barrels and ape swapping to get around quicker. Finally, there's a section called Cheating, which is a cheeky way to get more ammo and health by saving and restarting the game after fighting through the intro sequence. Classic magazine tip, that one. Below that, there's a top secret tips inside bit, focusing on DK Isles and specifically, 6 bananas to collect. It goes through each banana location step by step with screenshots. Number 1 is just before Jungle Japes, easy peasy. Number 2 is using Chunky after Frantic Factory to move a rock in Jungle Japes and playing Lanky's trombone on the pad underneath. Number 3 is in Angry Aztec, using Diddy to hit gongs, making a barrel appear, and then using Tiny to ponytail twirl across to get a banana. Number 4 is in Frantic Factory entrance, pulling a lever, hopping upstairs and playing bongos as Donkey to get another. Number 5 is behind K, Lumsy's lair in Fungi Forest, using Lanky to hit a grape switch. And lastly, number 6, further up the hill past the door to Angry Aztec, using Chunky to move 2 rocks, and then playing the triangle on the pad. So, there you go, 6 bananas sorted if you're struggling. Standard stuff for a tips page really, getting you through the early bits. This page then, is all about Jungle Japes from Donkey Kong 64, remember that one? It's giving you a guide on how to snag a few of those lovely golden bananas, because you can never have too many of those, can you? B. It starts off with the basics in the Just Started section, telling you to get the coconut shooter naturally, because what else are you going to use? Then it moves on to Rescue Diddy, which everyone remembers doing. It walks you through getting to Cranky for the barrel boost potion, which is always a bit of a faff. Then they're on about tag barrels and peanut pop guns and all that cave business, typical Donkey Kong really. Jatu. After that it's used Rambi, everyone's favourite rhino, using him to smash huts in Cranky's area to get more bananas. And finally it finishes with the boss section showing you how to deal with Armadillon, that rolling pain in the backside. 3 hits and he's down, simple as they say, Keisei. So yeah, classic N64 guide page. Probably helped a few kids back in the day get through Jungle Japes. Good times, good times. This page then, it's a guide for Angry Aztec in Donkey Kong 64, back when Rare was still knocking it out of the park on the N64. Right then, so just started, section tells you to get Diddy to play guitar, grab some coins and see candy. Seems straightforward enough for the little ones getting started. Then it moves on to, open the big stone door, which is the next part, telling you to find Cranky and get the rocket barrel boost. Classic Cranky, always got a bit of kit to sell you. The guide then walks you through rescuing Tiny Kong, having Diddy do an axe solo on a guitar pad to fill a pool, then scaling a tree and swinging across to a camel's cage. Sounds like classic Donkey Kong 64 puzzle solving, jumping through hoops, quite literally in some cases. They mention using Donkey to activate a pad outside the temple with the camel face, which is the next step. Next up, it's about collecting a banana the camel left, and then Lanky gets involved. You shoot a switch above the camel door as Donkey, then thump bongos on a pad as Lanky, and swim into a pool. More bananas of course, you can never have too many of those in DK64 can you? Barring switch above the camel doors. Finally, it says while you're in that room with the bongo pad, there's a switch, and you can buy Strong Kong from Cranky, and Stealthy Snoop from Funky. Always good to stock up on those moves. Yep, typical Donkey Kong 64 level guide in N64 Magazine, pretty helpful if you were stuck back in the day trying to get through Angry Aztec. This page is a right proper guide for Donkey Kong 64, showing you how to snag some bananas and rescue Tiny and Lanky Kong. Looks like they're showing us the ropes to get through some puzzles and boss fights in good old DK Isle. Dink. For rescuing Tiny, it seems you need to kit yourself out from Cranky, Funky and Candy, the usual suspects. Then it's off to the cave tunnels and some wall searching for switches and barrel blasting, classic Rareware platforming shenanigans. Then there's rescuing Lanky, involving buying an orange stand from Cranky. What a surprise. More grape switches, trombone playing, and statue climbing to be had. It's all about using the different Kong's abilities in it. Diddy's got a jetpack about and stamp switches, firing peanuts into statue gobs. Typical Donkey Kong logic. Fed the statue. Section seems to be about getting even more bananas by shooting coconut switches and finding your way through a temple. Left then right of course. Lanky can squash switches, and Tiny can fire feathers at other switches. Always with the switches in these games, eh? Finally, there's a boss section, looks like a giant firefly. Apparently she looks scary, but she's a pushover. Run left and right, chuck a barrel at her belly 3 times, and Bob's your uncle. They even say not to be scared of the fireballs, as they're harmless once they hit the ground. Reassuring, I suppose. 3 hits and she's gone. Until level 6. Cheeky sods. It's all good solid advice if you were stuck back in the day. Probably saved a fair few of us some grief. Remember having to flick through these pages to find out what to do next? Good times. This page from Club 64 takes me right back, doesn't it? It's all about Frantic Factory in Donkey Kong 64, that collectathon on the N64. So just started? Section is for players just entering the level, telling you to bash a blue switch to get going, follow the tunnels, and then pop to see old Cranky Kong to get the Baboon Balloon and the Super Simian Slam moves. Of course there's a banana in it for you, and even one for Tiny Kong hidden away. Purr. Next up, Rescue Chunky is about getting hold of Big Chunky Kong. It mentions buying his Hunky Chunky and Primate Punch moves from Cranky. You'll need your coins, mind you, suggesting having a rummage around Warpad 1. Then it's the usual smashing boxes and grates, using moves to get through and grab another banana. And there's that Stash Snatch minigame lurking about for another banana, and some coins for your trouble. Apparently there's a blue switch nearby that unlocks the toy room area. Heck. Lastly, found the toy room, covers what to do once you're in there. Diddy needs to get the Simian Spring move to play Peril Path Panic for a banana. Lanky uses a pad to float up to the Batty Barrel Bandit game. Banana prize again, naturally. Tiny gets a go in a mini-tunnel, playing Rotating Wheel O Objects for yet another banana. Donkey needs to jump on rising blocks and bash blocks in number order to get his banana. Finally they mention Funky Kong selling an ammo belt and pineapple gun, and Candy's triangle attack move. And then, you can run through a metallic door to the R&D area from the toy room. Blimey, bananas for everything in that level. Takes me back to spending hours collecting everything in that game. It really did have it all. The next page is all about Donkey Kong 64, isn't it? Classic N64 that. Looks like a how-to guide, probably aimed at getting all those bananas, eh? First bit's about finding the R&D area. Apparently Tiny can barrel through the ground floor to get into some scale-electric race. Sounds a bit mad. That does to earn a banana. Then it's Lanky's turn on a music pad, doing a bit of Simon Says with burping Kremlings. And you get a banana for that too. Chunky's involved as well, needing to punch a door on the second floor using his primate punch after smashing some toys and jumping in a barrel. Blimey, sounds like a right faff just for a banana. There's a bit for Diddy too, falling down a hole and Simeon slamming a switch for yet another banana, and Beaver bother time. Honestly, bananas for everything in that game, wasn't there? More? Ball? Then there's a section on activating the big machine. Open door, invincibility barrel, conveyor belts, you know the drill. Donkey leaps in and runs along to get a banana. There's something about slamming a chunky pad, spinning cylinders, and platforms for another banana. Lanky's switch opens another banana spot near the Toff and Scoff portal. Tiny needs to buy the ponytail swirl to use her helicopter hair to float across to a Crazy Kong minigame for yet another banana. It's banana madness. Warrington Dorcas. Finally, it talks about playing the DK arcade game. Donkey Kong needs to activate his donkey pad in Chunky's prison to play Barrel Blast. You'll need the Gorilla Grab potion, naturally, and the Nintendo coin you get for completing DK is important later on apparently. DK game. And there's a bit about a boss, Jack in the Box. Tiny needs the ponytail swirl again. Leaping between platforms. Color matching. Sparkly trails. Jack in the Box. Sounds like a typical Donkey Kong 64 boss fight. A bit fiddly but you get there in the end. Rejected toys ahoy, it says. Just like the Raggy Dolls. A bit scarier perhaps, but still. Yeah, Donkey Kong 64, loved it back then, even if it was a bit of a collectathon. This page is a bit of a tease for Donkey Kong 64, innit? There's a massive picture of Diddy Kong swinging about with a cheeky grin, and above him, in a sort of ripped paper effect, is a screenshot from the game. Looks like some kind of barrel area. Ducher. The big letters say, to be continued, which was probably meant to keep us hooked. It promises that next month's issue, number 38, is going to tell us everything about getting all the banana fairies, battle arenas, blueprints and golden bananas in Donkey Kong 64. Bit cheeky to call it the only guide you'll need, but back then we probably lapped it up. Everyone was mad for Donkey Kong 64 at the time, wasn't they? Big 3D collectathon, just what Rare were known for. Still, it's got that classic N64 chunky, colourful look that takes you right back. This page, well then, it's Planet Game Boy, isn't it? Right then, blimey. Mario Golf links up, shouts the headline. Big and bold. Seems like Nintendo thought they were onto a proper winner with Mario Golf, releasing it on both the N64 and Game Boy. They were banging on about linking the two versions together using some sort of transfer pack contraption. Apparently if you had both games and this pack thingy you could cart characters back and forth, and even boost your Game Boy character stats by playing the N64 version. Bit of a faff if you ask me. They mention you could only get this transfer pack if you bought a Japanese copy of Pokemon Stadium, which sounds like a right kerfuffle and a bit of a swizz for UK gamers at the time having to import just for this. They're saying it works with all versions of the N64 though, which is something at least. Then there's a bit about PALMITOP SNEZ. Ah, the Game Boy Advance! Remember all the hype around that? They're saying senior bods at Nintendo in Japan were spilling the beans about it being able to handle perfect conversions of SNES games. Apparently it was going to have 6 buttons, and they reckon Super Mario Kart DX and Super Mario World were going to be launch titles. And get this, 3D polygons. Proper fancy stuff for a handheld back then. Seemed like they were really pushing the boat out with this new handheld. Good times. This page is a review of Grand Theft Auto on the Game Boy from what looks like Planet Magazine. Must be an N64 mag from back in the day, around January 2000. They're giving it a decent 4 stars, saying well worth a look, this is an excellent title, not a bad score at all really. The review talks about how Grand Theft Auto caused a bit of a fuss on PC and PlayStation with all the violence and that, and now it's on the humble Game Boy, which is quite something for the time. They mention it's a good conversion, and Tarantula did the coding. Whoever they are. It seems like the game has got 3 cities, loads of cars to nick and plenty of people to run over, all squeezed into that little cartridge. They talk about the game's missions like collecting packages and taking out dodgy coppers. Apparently there's no in-game map, which is a bit of a pain, and the maps that came with the packaging are not much help either. Typical. Still, they reckon it's good fun causing mayhem hatter. They've got a section called A Life of Crime, breaking down the game. Jobs are about getting harder as you go, starting with simple deliveries. Cars are plentiful, from motorbikes to trucks, all ripe for the taking. Peds, well, they are just there to be flattened for points. Cops are relentless, but you can lose them if you're clever, or just mow them down. And pay is your score at the end, with a record of all your criminal deeds. Lovely. Looking at the screenshots, it's all top-down pixelated chaos, classic Game Boy style. Yeah, thinking back, GTA on the Game Boy was a bit of a novelty at the time, wasn't it? Good little handheld version of a controversial game. They say it's spectacularly violent, even without the drug references from the original. Haha, good times. This page in N64 Game Boy Magazine has a couple of reviews, starting with Evil Knievel. Remember Evil Knievel? Mad bloke jumping over things on a motorbike back in the day? Apparently there's a Game Boy Color game of it. They say it's from Take-Two, which is a name you see a lot these days. Price is 20 quid, which seems a bit steep for a Game Boy game even back then. Sounds like it's a bit of a strange one. They reckon it's like Konami's Crazy Bikers, but not really that fast-paced or arcadey. You're doing stunts and collecting stars, apparently on bizarre courses. They mention the handling being realistic, in a harsh way, like even a small bump can flip you over, and if you bang your head on the ceiling, game over. Charming. They say it's really difficult, but that's supposed to make it more rewarding if you stick with it. They reckon if you were into Evil Knievel bikes as a kid, this might be worth a punt. Poor cool. Then there's Missile Command. Another blast from the past, eh? Atari game this time, costing the same 20 quid. Missile Command was a classic arcade game, proper tense with that trackball, to frantically shoot down the missiles. They say this Game Boy Color version has cut the missile bases down because of the 2-button control. D-pad moves the cursor and buttons fire. They say it's the same old game apart from the colourful graphics and some city animations. Reviewer isn't too impressed though, reckons the graphics are a bit garish, and the controls are a bit clinical compared to the arcade. Says there are better retro arcade conversions out there. Bit harsh maybe, but there were loads of these old arcade games popping up on handhelds at the time, some good, some not so good. This page has a couple of game reviews on it. First up, it's Worms Armageddon for the Game Boy Color. Worms, yeah, that was a proper laugh on the consoles and PC back then. This Game Boy version, they're calling it Portable Worm-style Carnage, but it sounds a bit basic to be honest. Apparently the computer AI is clueless, and the graphics aren't anything special, with no explosions, can you believe it? Still, you can tinker with your team a bit. They've given it a 2 out of 5, which isn't brilliant, is it? Warrington Evit? Then there's Ronaldo v Football, with Ronaldo, the Brazilian superstar, you know the one. It's a football game, again on the Game Boy Color. Apparently it's a bit better looking than that Ubisoft's Total Soccer game. They reckon it's more of a cartoon-style footy game than trying to be realistic, and the ball's a bit dodgy, like a cheap plastic one from the shops. Sounds like a simple game for a quick go on the handheld. It got a 3 out of 5, so a bit better than the Worms then. There's a screenshot showing the Brazil team lineup, with all the names you'd expect like Rivaldo and Ronaldo himself. Proper players from back then. This page is about getting the most out of your Game Boy camera. Remember that brick? It's titled Art Class, and it's giving you some tips to make your snaps a bit more interesting. First off, they're talking about stamps, saying they can get a bit dull, which is fair enough. They suggest playing around with reversing images, and using the paint tools to spice things up. Remember those pixelated masterpieces you could create? It took forever, but you could get some decent results if you were patient. Then there's montage, suggesting you can create some outlandish effects or go for something subtler. They mention a gallery picture on page 54, using montage for faces, and that the paint tool is still handy for tidying up those sharp edges. Always a bit fiddly, that paint tool, but essential. Next up, trick lenses, the classic mirroring trick. They say it makes for realistic freaks. Bit strong language that, but yeah, you could get some funny twisted faces by holding the camera at an angle and mirroring half the screen. Jess in the office seems to be a pro at pulling faces and pointing the camera at the same time apparently. If your trick lens pics are a bit wonky, they suggest using someone else, or even an animal as your subject. Sensible advice. Finally, still life, which is about taking pictures of objects. They suggest using backgrounds and painting out unwanted bits. And there are examples with a Pikachu toy, even one where Pikachu is surfing apparently on a wave race mouse mat. Poor thing ended up minced by a bike's turbo though, according to the text. Bit dark for a kid's magazine, innit? Still, it does show what you could do with a bit of imagination and your Game Boy camera. This page from the magazine, right, is a proper blast from the past. It's the tips, scores and guides section, and it's all about getting the upper hand in your games, and bragging rights on the high score table. First up, we have Clacks. Remember that? Proper head scratcher that was, and they're giving away passwords to unlock minigames like Minesweeper and Snake, and some other bits and bobs like Clacks History, whatever that was supposed to be. Passwords were king back then, weren't they? No internet walkthroughs, you had to rely on magazines like this, or Whispers in the Playground. Then it's Mario Deluxe on the Game Boy Color, and it's talking about composing music after you've finished the game. Apparently you could mess about with tunes like Link's Ocarina, which is a cool little hidden feature if you were into that sort of thing. Next we're on to Asteroids, another oldie but goodie. They're dishing out passwords for different zones in the game like SPACEVAC and Warm Sign, and cheat codes too. CHEATONX for cheat mode, naturally. Those were simpler times, eh? Just bang in a code and suddenly you're invincible. Turok 2 on the Game Boy Color gets a mention for the good ending. Apparently you had to blow up a computer on level 9 before the incubator to see the proper finale. Always something hidden in those games, wasn't there? Bundukulwa. Then, we have the high score section. Pokemon pinball scores are at the top. Must have been pretty new then. A David Teixeira from New Zealand seems to be dominating that, and Mario Deluxe as well, fair play to him. Tetris DX high scores are in there too, and Game & Watch Gallery, Donkey Kong, Parachute and Chef, some proper retro classics there. Looks like Mark was a top player on Chef and Parachute, maybe we knew him. Good to see people getting their names in print for their gaming prowess, even if it was just in the local mag. This page of the mag, it's all about the Game Boy camera, remember that thing? The Game Boy Gallery they called it, and it was always good for a laugh. They've picked a winner this month, some fella who looks a bit, well, let's just say he might be living a bit too close to a nuclear power station according to them anyway. Bit harsh, but that's mags for you back then. Warrington way. Then there's a load of reader snaps, all taken with that blurry Game Boy camera. Richard Horsfield's got some dodgy looking breakfast cereal, apparently mutated. Someone called Zaim Ibrar has made something that no one should have to look at, which sounds about right for the Game Boy camera quality. Madeline Martins sent in something mildly unsettling, and Daniel Chow's been messing about with the stamp mode. Francis Woodcock's tried to be artistic, bless him. There's a Pokemon battle captured on film, apparently by Ford Cotterill. Must have been a right pixelated mess. Elwyn Males sent in something they reckon is manky, poor sod, and Jonathan Osis in Brighton has had something weird happen to him, who knows what that could be. Big T, whoever they are, sent in a picture of someone called Kirsty. David Jones reckons he spotted 3 eyes, 2 heads and 1 nose in his picture, which is a bit of a stretch. Satoshi Tajiri, or maybe not, has sent in what they are calling Mew 3, a reference to Pokemon of course. Robert Dale's having printer trouble, which we all did back then, and Michael Ookham's baby needs a burp apparently. Andrew Hyland's photo is one to avoid, they reckon, and someone else has used a Japanese camera, which is apparently noteworthy. And lastly, Ruben Larson is back again, making use of lighting and reflection effects, showing off as usual. Basically, it's a load of blurry weird pictures sent in by readers, all thanks to the Game Boy camera. Good times, eh? This page is all about ISS Millennium, or International Superstar Soccer Millennium. Looks like N64 Magazine were having a proper look at it as a special investigation. They're calling it Konami's football RPG masterpiece. Which is a bit strong, isn't it? To football game, alright, not sure about the RPG bit, maybe they're being a bit cheeky. Lelgua is a screenshot from the game. Standard football fare really, players running around on a pitch, looks like some goalmouth action going on against Germany and France. Then there's an info burst box, you know the kind, breaking down the game stats like it's a 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, and needs all sorts of packs: controller, expansion, rumble pack, the works. GB pack is a no-go though. Release dates are in there, spring for the UK and Japan already got it, typical. America is still TBA, and they've given it 5 red balls for anticipation, so someone's clearly keen. Release datey. Down the side it says, N64's special investigations can take us all over the world. This month, it was Major A's swanky offices in Osaka, Japan. Sounds like they got a jolly to Japan to check it out, lucky sods. Issue 37 of N64 Magazine. That takes me back a bit. This page delves into ISS Millennium. Looks like they're banging on about the Hires United expansion pack. Remember plugging that thing in? Supposed to make everything look a bit sharper. And yeah, looking at these screenshots, you can see the difference. They reckon it makes the graphics crisper when you switch to Hires mode. Mind you, they also say it can get a bit jerky at times, probably pushing the old N64 a bit too hard. Says it's more enjoyable to play in normal mode, even if the Hires looks prettier. Sensible enough. They're also on about the stadiums, mentioning they haven't got the official FIFA license, which was always EA's domain, wasn't it? But fair play, they've still managed to get some proper grounds in there like Saint Denis, the Maracana, and San Siro, which are way better than the generic J-League grounds they were using before apparently. There's some blurb about the player names being in kanji because the translation wasn't finished for all modes yet. Bit rough and ready, but we were used to that back then. They've highlighted a few bits in the screenshots. Haster apparently has a magical right foot, always good to have one of those. And they're impressed with the keepers, saying they're as nimble as Shilton back in the day. Bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. Oh, and they're pointing out a smooth left-footed action, reckon it's a sure goal. Overall, sounds like the highest pack is a nice visual upgrade, even if it might chug a bit. Standard stuff really for expansion packs back then, wasn't it? This page is all about the career mode in ISS Millennium on the N64. Right at the top it talks about how this new feature sets it apart from other football games. First up, choosing a player. And blimey, they've used real photos for the faces now, not those cartoon heads from before. They reckon you'll be stuck with that face for ages, so you better pick a decent looking mug. Then you get to name your club, local non-league team, school team, anything you fancy really to give your player some history. After that, you pick your position, whether you want to be a midfielder, defender or striker, which apparently affects your career path. Making mates is important too, coaches, trainers, dietitians, all helping you improve your stats, so surround yourself with good people to get that international call-up apparently. There's a spot the difference bit talking about the Japanese version, J-League Perfect Striker 2, saying it's got a different feel, more manga style and hand-drawn characters with big eyes, compared to the European version, ISS Millennium, which is supposed to be more serious and European-looking with photographs. They reckon IS Millennium is more mature, which is probably what we wanted back then, less of that cartoon stuff. Down the bottom, there's a bit about the lifespan of your player, training to improve skills like stamina and speed, and how a player starting out weak can eventually become a superstar if you put the effort in. They mention training exercises to work on different attributes. The reviewer seems pretty impressed, saying the career mode is a brilliant way to breathe new life into footy games, comparing it to Konami's Power Pro Baseball series. They think if European gamers like it, we might see career modes in more sports games in the future. It all sounds quite good. A bit more depth than just kicking a ball about, eh? This page of N64 Magazine, it's doing a bit of a special investigation. Looks like they are talking about footy games, International Superstar Soccer to be precise, or ISS as we used to call it. There's a headline talking footy, which is a bit of alright. Looks like an interview with someone called Major A from the ISS team. They are chatting about the latest game, ISS Millennium. Apparently only 2 of the original team are still working on it, which is interesting. They're proud of making the game realistic and having good gameplay, and they keep trying to improve it, like adding the career mode, which was a decent addition at the time. One question is about what aspects of previous ISS games needed improving. Major A reckons the playing speed was a bit too quick and made it unbalanced. Fair point. They've tried to fix that in Millennium. They also asked about other football games they admire. Major A mentions FIFA from EA, Virtua Striker from Sega, and Winning 11 from KCE Tokyo, saying they all have something good. Always good to be respectful to the competition, eh? There's talk about differences between ISS Millennium and Perfect Striker 2. Apparently the teams are changed to national teams from the J-League in Perfect Striker, and there's a Euro mode now, probably for Euro 2000, which was coming up that summer. Remember that? Good times. They also ask if they nicked any ideas from other footy games, and Major A says they haven't outright copied anything, but might use them as a base for their own ideas. Can't blame them for that, can you? Then there's a question about how hard it is to get the game running in hires, and Major A says it's tricky because of memory limitations on the N64, and it can mess with the game balance if they push the resolution too high. Makes sense. Finally, they ask about the future of ISS and Major A. Major A just says they'll keep making football games and want to offer entertainment through football, and thinks the career mode is important. Bit of a standard PR answer to finish off there, innit, Rico? On the page itself you've got screenshots of the game, one showing the options screen with player stats like SCR, SHT, SPD, DSH, STA, JMP, RET, DEF, PAS. Another showing a training mode, and another a match in progress, Germany versus France it looks like. Bit blurry those old N64 graphics now, aren't they? But back then, it was the dog's bollocks. This page is all about Nintendo's plans for the year 2000, looking like they were expecting it to be a proper good year for their machines. It starts off talking about January, and it mentions South Park Rally hitting the shelves after some previous South Park game mishaps, which is a bit cheeky. They reckon the sounds and the Mario Kart style gameplay should do well, and it seems like they are pushing Nuclear Strike 2, a chopper sim. Then February is mentioned, with Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness, which they say shows improvement from the previous one, but the camera is still a bit dodgy it seems, which is a classic Castlevania 64 problem in it. And for the Game Boy they are highlighting Pokemon Pinball, which fair enough, was always a bit addictive. Yee. There's a picture of Kenny from South Park Rally driving a cart, and another screenshot from Castlevania showing a boss, a dragon-looking thing. All in all, it's setting up 2000 to be a strong year for Nintendo, with a good mix of games coming out in the new year. This page is having a look ahead at what's coming to the N64 in the year 2000, month by month. Starting in March they're mentioning ISS Millennium, which is Konami's footy game, sounding like it's getting a role-playing mode which is a bit different. Then there's a game that sounds like Micro Machines called Mini Racers, which they reckon could be good. Moving on to April, they're talking about Perfect Dark finally coming out. About time really, been waiting ages for that one. Also Mario Party 2 is coming, sequel to the board game thingy, apparently loads of new minigames and bits and bobs. May might see the release of Conker 64, which has been in development for donkey's years. Apparently they rebuilt it from scratch. They're wondering if it will be too similar to Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo. Sounds a bit odd, this Conker character, described as a squirrel with an inane smile. And there's a blue rabbit mentioned somewhere in there too, sounds a bit bonkers. Warrinsmire. Lastly in June it's more Pokemon with yellow version. Apparently it's closer to the cartoon, and Pikachu is in it, obviously. Also Ridge Racer 64 is mentioned, Namco Arcade Racer, PlayStation conversion. Previews weren't great, but they're saying there's still time to sort it out. They have a little picture of Pikachu with the line, electrifying. Cool, bit cheesy isn't it? This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at what's coming out for the rest of the year 2000. Kicking off with July, they're on about rumors of a sequel to that Star Wars Episode 1 racer game, reckoning it might even be a first-person shooter like the old Dark Forces games. They mention Rogue Squadron as well, so they're clearly keen on Star Wars stuff. Check A. Then for August, it seems like Duke Nukem 0 Hour is heading to the N64. Apparently it's been in development for ages and is going to be a bit like GoldenEye. You know, a 007 style shooter. They're even saying it uses the same engine as 0 Hour, whatever that is. Cha-cha shooter. September's looking like a busy month. Pokemon Stadium 2 is coming, which is probably a big deal for the young'uns, letting you use your Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow teams in 3D with that transfer pack thingy. And there's also Super Mario Adventure, which they're calling a British version of Super Mario RPG 2, a bit of a mix of 2D and 3D, minigames and RPG elements. Sounds a bit odd, but they seem to think it'll be a ruddy corker, whatever that means. October is all about Banjo-Tooie, finally coming out after ages in development. They're talking about getting that ice key in Freezy Peak, which sounds familiar from the first game, and apparently Mission Impossible 2, the game, is also slated for October. They reckon it's using the GoldenEye engine, and is made by the same people who did that Outcast PC game. Lastly, there's a bit about a game called Rika. Apparently it was rumored to be using the Zelda engine, which is a bit surprising. It's supposed to be a mysterious game coming out around November, maybe alongside Eternal Darkness. Made by some studio called Bit Studios, and published by Nintendo. They're saying it's got GoldenEye vibes with guns and gadgets, and a female lead a bit like Lara Croft. They've not shown anything of it really, just the one picture, so who knows what that'll actually be like. This page from N64 Magazine back in January 2000 is having a look at what's coming up for the N64 in the coming months, specifically November and December of that year. Right then, let's have a butcher's you. For November we're finally getting Kirby 64. They call it a side-scroller like Yoshi's Story, which is a bit of a dig, innit? But yeah, Pink Blob is here on the N64 at last, and apparently he can nick enemy abilities again, which is neat. Should be alright for the younger players, I suppose. Warrington Nor. Then there's Turok 3, they're saying end of 2000 release. Seems like they're going back to dinosaurs, and less of those multi-legged creepy crawlies, thank God. Prehistoric settings, darker dungeons, all sounds a bit samey to be honest, but Turok's always been a decent blast. And Eternal Darkness, now this one sounds interesting. They saw it at E3, and reckon it's a mix of Zelda and Resident Evil. Which is a weird combo, right? Fixed cameras, pre-rendered backgrounds, sounds properly old school in some ways, but they say it's very scary. Developed by Silicon Knights, who did Legacy of Kain on the PlayStation, so they know their stuff. Zelda-esque story with skeletons and a sword hero, could be a bit of alright if they pull it off. Moving on to December, they're bigging up the end of the year as being massive for the N64, mainly because of Mother 3, or Earthbound 2 as they reckon it'll be called over here. Been in development donkey's years, longer than any other N64 game apparently. They are calling it an amazing showpiece and a proper role player, unlike Zelda with its actiony approach. Turn-based battles, that's a bit old hat these days, but we'll see. Zelda Gaiden, or Majora's Mask as we know it now, is coming to the UK 8 months after Japan and the States. Expansion pack compatible, and Miyamoto free, whatever that means. They reckon it's still brilliant though, even if it's not Ocarina, especially with the masks giving Link new abilities. And apparently you can get attacked by 6 Stalfos skeletons at once, which they think is amazing. Bit much if you ask me. Mickey's Racing USA's on the cards too, Rare's first Disney game on the N64. Racing game, bit like Diddy Kong Racing they say, using an updated version of that engine. Kart racing, multiplayer mode, nothing too groundbreaking then. Reiki. Finally, there's a section about the Dolphin, which is what we now know as the GameCube. Christmas release looking doubtful, apparently no one's even seen a working model. And they haven't even started a Dolphin game yet. Miyamoto himself said Zelda took 3 years from scratch, which is a long time in games development. Loads of developers are interested apparently, Rare, Retro Studios, Konami, Capcom, loads of them. But no development kits have gone out yet. PlayStation 2 is launching soon, so they're worried Nintendo will be left behind. They'll keep us updated, they say. Sounds like a bit of a mess, typical Nintendo really. Still, some decent looking games coming out before then, eh? This page is all about a massive Pokemon giveaway, right then at the height of Pokemania. They're giving away a mountain of Pokemon tats, everything from beanies and hats to shirts and electronic widgets, basically all the merchandise they could find kicking around the office. Worried to win this trove of poker goodies, you had to answer 3 brain-tickling questions. Well, brain-tickling for kids maybe. First one was who invented Pokemon, a question that's probably got a pretty simple answer. Second, name somewhere you can find a moonstone, which any self-respecting Pokemon trainer should know. And lastly, how many Pokemon are in Pokemon Snap, a game that was quite the novelty at the time, wandering around taking pictures of Pokemon. They're asking you to jot your answers on a postcard and send it off to Future Publishing in Bath, a simpler time before emails and online forms for everything. Looking at the picture of all the stuff you could win, it's quite the haul really. Loads of Pikachu plushies of course, a Snorlax, some trading card game bits, and even a Pokemon pinball machine that was a decent handheld distraction back in the day, and a Pokemon Challenge electronic game, looked a bit like a spinning top contraption. It's a proper blast from the past to see all this again. This page is from N64 Arena, looks like issue 37, right then front cover. Big splash for Ready to Rumble boxing, can't miss that massive boxer fella looming over everything. They're calling it Midway's comedy punch-up, saying it hits the UK. Corny as you like, typical magazine humour. Then we've got NBA Jam 2000, blimey, another basketball game. 2 basketball games in one shiny cart they reckon. Alright if you like that sort of thing. Page 70 if you're interested in that. Jarines, Armorines, Starship Troopers, on the N64 that's a shout. Always liked blowing up bugs back then. Go to page 72 for that, apparently. Joe! Fighting Force. Cause 3D Beat MUP finally gets a PL release. Remember that one? Bit of a button basher, wasn't it? Page 76 if you want to read more. Toy Story 2 Game of the Film. Not bad at all, shocker, they're saying. Well, they usually are alright, those film tie-in games, aren't they? Page 78 for Buzz and Woody. And then Pokemon Snap. Photograph your favorite Pokemon. Yeah, that was a bit different, wasn't it? Not your usual Pokemon battling game. Page 80 for that one. Ryu. Down the bottom there's a bit about Import Arena. Games they're playing in America and Japan, with the stars and stripes and the Japanese flag. For those fancy games we couldn't get over here yet, or maybe at all. And that's about it really, the main bits on the page. Games reviews, mostly. Standard magazine stuff back then. This page from the magazine is all about how they review games, right? Down to the nitty-gritty. It's called Viewed, Rated, and Completed. Bit dramatic innit? They reckon they're the best reviewers around, and they break it all down for you. There's this info burst section. In this issue they're using Metroid 64 as an example. It tells you all the techie bits, like it's a 256 megabit cartridge, 1 to 4 players, and all that jazz about controller packs and rumble packs. Remember those? Seems like they're trying to figure out if it'll work with the new GB pack when it comes out. Says it's costing about 40 quid, which was a fair bit back then. Looks like they're guessing it'll be out in April in the US, May in the UK, and November in Japan. Bit vague. Renze. Then there's how they actually score games. 85% and above is a star game, only given if they've played it right through and think it's top notch. 84% to 70% means it's still good, worth your money. 69% to 50% is average, playable but nothing special, just doing the job on the N64. Below 50%? Forget about it, apparently lazily programmed or rushed out the door. And anything below 20% is just a disaster, absolute crud, they say. Bit harsh maybe? Or, they've got Team 64 inches down the bottom. These are the reviewers: Tim Weaver, Will Overton, Andrea Bull, Justin Webb, Jess Bickham, Martin Kitts, Mark Green, Dark Mark, and Neil Padot. They've all got pictures looking a bit battered and bruised, looks like they've been playfighting or something daft. Each of them has picked a game of the month. Tim Weaver went for Ready to Rumble, Will Overton for Pokemon Snap, Andrea Bull with Toy Story 2, Justin Webb picked Fighting Force, Jess Bickham went for Armorines, Martin Kitts also liked Pokemon Snap, Mark Green chose Ready to Rumble again, Dark Mark also picked Ready to Rumble, seems popular that month, and Neil Padot went for Fighting Force again. They all have little captions under their names, mostly silly jokes about fighting each other. Yeah. They also talk about pluses and minuses, good and bad points broken down, and if you like this section, suggesting games you might like if you're into the game they're reviewing. In the example, if you liked GoldenEye you might like Turok 2, makes sense. Ikinikina. Then they score games out of 10 in different areas: visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan and verdict. Visuals is about graphics, sounds is sound effects and music, mastery is how well the game uses the N64 hardware, lifespan is how long it'll keep you playing, and verdict is the overall opinion and score. Standard stuff really. Seems like a pretty thorough way to do a review. For the time. This page in N64 Magazine issue 37, they're having a look at Ready to Rumble boxing on the N64. It seems like they previewed it, or maybe they didn't. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, typical magazine humor, eh? Right at the top, there's a section about the atmosphere in the game, saying the arenas are animated, no waving crowds or flashy screens, but you've got the ref counting out fighters, cornermen shouting advice, and crowd noise getting louder with bloodier moves. They even say bring back Jim Rosenthal for commentary, showing their age a bit there. Then there's a big splash image of the game with two blokes boxing, one called Thrashar and another called Dame Mackle, looking a bit chunky if I'm honest, but that was the style back then, cartoonish and over the top. There's a comment about eating all the pies and still being able to get in the ring, and another about maybe not playing as Salua in first-person view if you're squeamish. Charming. Below that big image there's the title Ready to Rumble in massive letters. And then, an info burst box with all the nerdy stats. It's from Midway, a 256 megabits cart, 1 or 2 players, takes up 9 pages on your controller pack. Remember those? Cartridge save is a no-go, same with password and expansion pack. Rumble pack is a yes thankfully, and GB pack is a no. It was out then, in the UK and US at least, but not in Japan according to this, and cost £40. Blimey, games were pricey back then. Atay. The main text reckons it's like Bruno. You know, Bruno Sammartino, a fighter that doesn't take itself seriously. They mention it's been a couple of months for N64 beat-em-ups, name-dropping Xena, Warrior Princess and WWF WrestleMania 2000, saying Ready to Rumble is a bit different with its razzle-dazzling action and humorous KOs. They're asking if it can take on the genre giants. We'll see, won't we? Happy. There are more screenshots dotted about. One's from a spectator view, making a joke about why crowds riot. Another one's about Flurry's falling down move taking ages. Then there's one about national media debating women in boxing, and Ready to Rumble just going ahead and doing it, showing a female boxer called S-Strike from Brazil. Good for them, I suppose. Another screenshot talks about a victory for Rivera against fat old sumo-style Salua, with a comment about his hair. Bit harsh. And the last one mentions Valentine, rumbling real nice, with the battle of the sexes and excitement. Bit cheeky that. There's also a character select screen picture, showing Butcher Brown and Selene Strike, and a few other faces, all very cartoony. All in all, it looks like Ready to Rumble is trying to be a bit of a laugh, not your serious boxing sim then. Could be a bit of fun with mates though, down the pub after a few pints maybe. This page right then we've got a feature called Fight Club, which is a quick run-through of the one-player championship mode in Ready to Rumble boxing. It starts off showing you having to get your fighter in shape with some gym work, described as Simon-style aerobics training, which they say is painfully tricky. Next up, you're encouraged to enter a prize fight even when you are skint, and maybe spice things up with a side bet to make it interesting. Then it talks about winning a fight against someone called Nokimov, saying you can use your prize winnings to get better gym equipment like a stamina-boosting heavy bag. Apparently if you lose a fight you've lost nothing but your self-respect, so just jump back in for another go, and prize fighters are supposedly susceptible to special moves, so get waggling those fingers. Finally, once you've won enough fights, you can enter a title fight and improve your ranking. It reckons things are about to get tougher. Below that, there's a section called Keep On Pumping, talking about the training section in Ready 2 Rumble, which is supposed to stop the championship mode getting too repetitive. It says it's essential for improving your fighter's stats, strength, stamina, and dexterity through subgames. They reckon they aren't great, being icon-style subgames, and the timing's a bit off when you tap the controller to the music and button presses, so you might get told training over pretty quickly and lose your money, bah. It does mention you'll need to do at least 2 prize fights to afford decent training equipment. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 37, is having a look at Ready 2 Rumble Boxing. It seems to be a preview or early review, judging by the What's in the Box headline. Right at the top, there's a bit about legal stuff, mentioning Anton Deck and Michael Buffer, about the phrase, "Let's get ready to rumble." Apparently someone nearly sued over it, but it was all a bit silly. The main section breaks down the game's features. Fists talks about the controls, saying it's easy to punch with a button and analog stick, and stamina is important. Flair is about dodging and weaving, using buttons and the analog stick to avoid punches, saying you can wait for your opponent to grunt to know when to dodge. Bit odd. Frenzy, or Frenzy, is about spelling out rumble, with letters that appear when you draw blood to get in a flurry of punches. Falls is about getting knocked down when your strength meter empties. You can wriggle the stick to get back up, but the third time you're down, it's game over. Standard boxing stuff really, but with a rumble twist, e.g. The screenshots show some of the in-game action. There's a boxer with a massive afro and called the doctor on his waistband, a woman boxer, and some chunky-looking blokes going at it in the ring. One picture has a caption pointing out lens flare in 3D games is now legally enforced by an EU directive, which is clearly a joke about how much lens flare was in games back then. Another caption says, "Gasp! Female beat-em-up character in butt-covering skirt shocker." Again, a bit of a cheeky comment. The main text underneath the screenshots talks about how it's a comedy boxing game, not trying to be realistic like Knockout Kings 2000. It's supposed to be more about fun with larger-than-life characters and over-the-top moves. They mention midway of realize beat-em-ups are good for mates playing together, and this is designed for that. They mention the Michael Buffer voice, and how the RRR ready YYY2 Rumbles catchphrase is there. They reckon it's a bit different from proper boxing, more about cartoonish fights. The lifespan section at the bottom says the strength of the game is in 2-player mode, where each punch feels better with a mate next to you. They say the single player gets tedious quickly, and the computer opponents are a bit unfair at dodging punches. They mention a rumble combo which is a bit too easy to use. The championship mode is mentioned, with betting and prize money, and they think that's good for keeping you interested. But they also say the only unlockable characters in 2-player are fighters you've already got in single-player, except for one demon-like character, so not much point there. They also mention a training mode which is rhythm-based but sloppily executed. Overall, it sounds like they think Ready 2 Rumble Boxing is a decent laugh for a bit of multiplayer fun, but maybe not the deepest game out there. Bit of light-hearted button bashing with mates. Perfect for a rental on a Friday night with pizza and cans of fizzy pop. This page is a review of Ready 2 Rumble Boxing for the N64. Looking at the screenshots, it's all quite colourful and cartoonish, a bit different from your usual gritty boxing games. They've got some pretty goofy looking characters in the ring, blokes with afros and that sort of thing. It's all a bit of a laugh. The review reckons the motion capture is rather good, which you can see, they are pulling some shapes alright. They mention the animation is a bit jerky though, which is a fair point. It talks about how each fighter has their own unique look and personality, so it's not just a load of clones punching each other. They say it's satisfying landing a flurry of punches and there's a bit of a wrestling feel to it, which sounds like fun for multiplayer. They're saying it's a bit sluggish in terms of controls, which is a shame, and that it can be a bit frantic when button bashing. They also reckon that if you're after something to fill the gap between wrestling and proper boxing games, Ready 2 Rumble is alright. But they also mention Knockout Kings 2000, saying that's a more accomplished boxing game and has Muhammad Ali in it, which is a big draw, isn't it? They reckon Ready 2 Rumble is okay for a laugh with mates, but perhaps not as deep as some other fighters out there. In the pluses and minuses bit, they liked the animation and that it's a laugh in 2-player, and the presentation. On the minus side, they mention limited characters, unexciting single-player, and sluggish controls, which echoes what they said in the main review. The final verdict is not bad at all, especially for multiplayer, but they say the N64 has got better fighting games. It gets an 81% score in the end. So decent enough, but maybe not a stone-cold classic. This page in N64 Magazine back in the day is having a look at NBA Jam 2000. Right at the top it says, 2 hoop games for the price of 1. Result! Which sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? Apparently you get both a serious basketball sim and the more arcadey NBA Jam style game all in one cartridge. They've got a little pluses and minuses section, bit like a school report. Pluses are 2 games for the price of 1, good commentary, and loads of secrets. Minuses are, it's not quite fast enough and needs 2 controller packs. Remember those memory card things? Always needed more of those. There's a section saying, if you like this, and it mentions NBA Courtside on the N64, saying it got 90% in issue 18 and calling it the Michael Jordan of basketball games. Strong words. This Jam 2000 game is getting 80%, so not quite Jordan then. Dory. They've got these little boxes down the side rating different things. Visuals get a shout for being very sharp high-res graphics with plenty of animation. Sounds get a mention for lively commentary, annoying music, and sporty cheers and boos. Sounds about right for a basketball game from that era. Mastery is about splitting the game in 2 being a good idea, and lifespan is about 2 separate challenges. The verdict is pretty positive, calling it a huge game and saying it recaptures the spirit of the old Jam arcade games. Good if you were into that kind of thing. The reviewer, Martin Kitts, says the computer defense is very solid, and it's hard to score outside of simple shots. He reckons they stuck with Jam mode for most of the time, and that it's not quite as good as Courtside, but still more varied, and a good bet for anyone who has already played Kobe Bryant's game to death. Bit dramatic there at the end. There's an info burst table with all the techie details, like 128 megabits cart size, it's for 14 players, needs 2 controller packs, and some flags for release dates, looks like January 15th in the US and UK. And Japan is TBA. £40 cost. Remember paying that much for games? Blimey. Then they've got a make-your-own section saying since it's an acclaimed sports game there's a player editor included. You can use your creations in the attitude mode, and they made some character that's a fine fat bloke with Groucho glasses and a 7 feet 10 inches beanpole who fell over every time anyone breathed on him. Sounds. Maige, creative. Maige. Overall, seems like a decent basketball game, especially if you were after a bit of arcade fun alongside something more serious. 80% isn't bad, is it? This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Armorine's project SWARM for the N64. It seems Acclaim are trying to make a game that's like Turok 2, but with bugs instead of dinosaurs. The reviewer reckons Turok 2 was alright, despite some fog and framerate issues, and this game is trying to be a faster version of it, crossed with Starship Troopers. Sounds a bit ambitious, doesn't it? PK. Apparently you can play as 2 characters, Tony Lewis or Myra Lane, which is a nice touch for co-op play. They each have different weapons too. Looking at the screenshots, the bugs do look a bit nasty, horrible even, according to one of the captions. One shot shows a bug getting zapped by a volcanic laser, another shows 2 bugs headbutting each other, and there's a spidery looking one you apparently meet near the end. Doesn't look like a picnic on this bug homeworld, that's for sure. The info burst bit says it's from Acclaim, a 128 megabits cart, supports 1 to 4 players, and uses a controller pack. Password saves are out, expansion and GB packs are a no-go, but Rumble Pack is in. It was out now in the UK and US, and TBA for Japan, costing £40. 40 quid! Blimey, games were pricey back then. Overall, the reviewer seems cautiously optimistic, wondering if the finished game can live up to its promise. They've been following it for 6 months, so they're keen to see how it turns out. They say to read on for the answers, so I guess we'll find out if it's any good on the next page. This page from N64 Magazine in January 2000 is all about Armorine's project SWARM, focusing on the artillery and multiplayer aspects. Right at the top it's got a section called Artillery Action, showing off the different weapons you can get your hands on in the game. There's the rocket launcher, which they say isn't as impressive as Turok 2's, bit of a dig there but still effective for splattering those insect beasties. Then there's the volcanic laser, sounds a bit fiddly to aim with its needle-thin beam, but packs a punch for the bigger bugs apparently. Next up is the shotgun, a bit of a weird one, fires electricity webs or you can use it like a cattle prod up close nice. Proximity mines are there too, pulse rings of energy to attract bugs, then boom, job done. Machine gun is your standard fare, good for mowing down hordes, though not as flash as Jet Force Gemini's version apparently. More digs. And finally, the slime gun, which is a bit unusual, and fires corrosive mucus lovely. Then there's a bit about the game's fog of Paw, bit harsh, saying it's foggier than Turok 2, which uses the same engine. They do mention you can adjust the fog level, which is a good idea. Apparently turning it off makes the game run faster, but you get some dodgy pop-in, so swings and roundabouts. The bottom half of the page is about Mayhem Squared and the multiplayer modes. Coupe mode is mentioned, with rumors of Perfect Dark maybe getting Coupe 2. Big news at the time that was for Perfect Dark. They say Acclaim beat Rare to it with Armorines. Deathmatch is the other mode, a straight-up gunfest, kill or be killed. They say the deathmatch arenas are a bit plain and wide open, and the fog makes things shocking again. Frame rate drops sometimes, but it's still better than Turok 2's deathmatch, another sly dig at Turok 2. Overall, it sounds like Armorines is offering some decent bug blasting action, especially in multiplayer, even if it's a bit foggy and maybe not as polished as some of the Rare games kicking about back then. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 37, dives into Armorines. Project SWARM, remember that one? It's got a lava lamping guide, which is a walkthrough for the first volcano level. It's broken down into 8 numbered steps like a bite-sized guide to get you through. Each step has a screenshot and a bit of blurb, starting with crashing in the wreckage and fighting off bugs, then dealing with cliffside bugs and commanding officers, crossing a lava gorge. Mind you don't fry yourself, finding a tunnel with more bugs, natch, ambushes, statue switches, treacherous mountain passes, and finally blasting through a cracked wall at the summit. It sounds like a bit of a bug blasting bonanza, doesn't it? War bugs. Then there's a review section, giving it a bit of an appraisal. The reviewer reckons the game's got a strong start. What with all the bug killing and the lip-quivering weaponry, that's a bit of a vivid description. They mention it being compared to Starship Troopers, which was definitely the vibe they were going for back then with giant insects. They point out the fog, saying Acclaim London couldn't get rid of it, just like in Turok and its sequel. Apparently the engine is looking a bit dated, mentioning Jet Force Gemini as a more contemporary example at the time, but they've tweaked it to handle more enemies on screen, which is good, I suppose. There's a bit of sarcasm, saying it's like going back to the Duke Nukem Xi era, remember that? Visually they say the fog helps hide the graphical limitations, and the explosions are a bit weak. Weapons-wise they're varied, but apparently a bit underwhelming, like the rocket launcher is weedy and the grenade launcher fires peas. Hardly sounds earth-shattering, does it? Gameplay-wise they say it's smoother than Turok 2, even with frame rate dips, and shooting bugs from distance is satisfying, comparing it favorably to GoldenEye and Rage Wars in terms of aiming, at least for bug carapaces at 50 yards. They reckon the weapons are disappointing visually compared to Turok 2, but they do the job. There's also a caption under a screenshot of a boss character, saying it's certainly no pushover, and licks you with a poisonous tongue. Charming! And in a pied sniper box they mention a sniper mode, activated like in Turok 2, by tapping right on the D-pad, and using the R button and C buttons, to zoom, handy for picking off those bugs from a distance then. This page from N64 Magazine takes me right back, doesn't it? It's a review of Armorines, Project SWARM, which, if I remember right, was trying to cash in on that bug-blasting action craze, you know, like Starship Troopers and all that. They've got some screenshots here, looks like a bit of a mixed bag visually. Some bits look alright, others are a bit bland and brown, typical of the N64 in some ways. They're talking about British rail sections, which are on-rails bits, makes sense I suppose, and monorail, which sounds like more of the same. Then there's gunship sections, where you're flying around in a dropship, blasting bugs, which sounds like it could be a laugh. They mention a chain gun, always a bonus. Under mastery they're banging on about the rocket launcher being a bit weak, fires weedy looking peas, bit harsh maybe. They do say the bugs are properly insect-like and sinister, and that the swarms are impressive, so that's something I guess. They mention rescuing marines and scientists, typical game objectives of the time. The pluses and minuses bit is pretty standard stuff. Pluses are fantastic bugs, fast and frantic gameplay, mission objectives, atmosphere, and brave coupe mode. Minuses are lame weapons, fogtastic graphics, drab and plain visuals, lacks sparkle, and jerky deathmatch and coupe. Lacks sparkle is a bit of a British understatement for dull, isn't it? Then they've got a section, if you like this, and they mention Body Harvest for the N64. They say, ugly but great, bug-blasting third-person action/adventure, which is about right for Body Harvest. It was a bit rough around the edges but had its moments. A bit like this Armorines game sounds really. Cheshire. The reviewer gives it a 76% verdict, calling it an enjoyable, if unspectacular bugfest that lacks the excitement of the Turok games. So, decent enough for a rental maybe back then, but not exactly setting the world on fire. Sums it up pretty well really. This page from N64 Magazine is having a right go at Fighting Force. Blimey, what a stinker this game was according to them. It's got a big score at the bottom, a measly 26%, ouch. Looks like they really didn't rate it back in issue 37, saying standing still is more fun. That's harsh. Catty. They've got a section called pluses and minuses, which is a bit funny because under pluses it just says unintentionally hilarious. Not exactly a glowing recommendation. Then under minuses there's a list of proper gripes. Repetitive gameplay, a lazy camera, naff fighting moves and no AI to speak of. They even reckon you can complete the whole thing with just one attack, which sounds about right for some of these N64 brawlers, didn't it? Tammy, there's a bit about what they thought of it in a previous issue, saying it was rubbish then and still rubbish now, haha, no messing about there. They mention the graphics are functional, but jaggy like a PlayStation game. Sounds about right for early 3D, yeah? And the sound is apparently quiet apart from meaty crunches. Lovely. They've got a bit that says, if you like this, and recommends Xena Warrior Princess on the N64. Reckon it's much better. And it was, wasn't it? They've even given Xena an 81% in a past review, so quite a difference in quality. They are not holding back, calling Fighting Force a hideously poor N64 game, and saying to avoid it like your life depends on it. Crikey. That's telling you something. They also mention you spend ages trying to grab weapons, and the animation is dead slow, plus the enemies just stand there bemused. Sounds like a right old mess, to be honest. Looking at the info burst bit, it's from Core and Crave. 64 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, uses 10 pages on the controller pack and all that technical stuff. They were proper thorough back then, weren't they? This page is from the Import Arena, part of N64 Magazine, and they're taking a look at Toy Story 2 on the N64. Seems they are reviewing games that are only out in Japan or America at the moment. There's a bit called Robot Ruckus about a mini-boss fight. Apparently this wind-up robot you find in the attic is a bit of a tough nut to crack. Buzz's lasers and spin moves are useless against it. The advice is to let the robot attack, and then get your shots in when it's all worn out. Standard boss fight stuff, really. Then there's an info burst box with the game facts. Toy Story 2 from Activision, a 64 megabit game, just 1 player, and you'll need 12 pages on your controller pack. It was out now in America, due in March in the UK, and TBA for Japan. Toy Story 2. It was alright, I suppose. The N64 was a good console for its time, mind. This page, right then, it's a look at Toy Story 2 for the N64. Remember that one? They were always churning out movie times back then, weren't they? The reviewer here seems pleasantly surprised, mind you. Starts off a bit cynical, expecting another rubbish movie game like that Bug's Life effort on the PlayStation. Remember that stinker? But reckons Toy Story 2 is alright, actually. Bay. Seems like you're Buzz Lightyear, wandering around Andy's house, which is massive when you're toy-sized, naturally. They've got screenshots showing Buzz in the kitchen with toasters and microwaves looking properly dangerous, and another bit with him climbing shelves. They mention you get to race RC cars and collect sheep and soldiers. Sounds like typical platforming bits and bobs, bit of puzzle solving thrown in. E.T. There's a section called Sheep Search, which is a mini-guide showing you where to find lost sheep in different rooms of the house. On shelves, in the kitchen, living room, garage, attic. Bit of a collectathon by the sounds of it. They've got a pluses and minuses bit, saying it's fairly well designed, mildly enjoyable, and highlights Buzz Lightyear as a plus, which is hardly a surprise. On the minus side, quite simple, nothing new, and terrible static photo intro scenes. Yeah, those blurry FMV cutscenes were never great, were they? If you liked this sort of thing, they recommend Rocket, Robot on Wheels, which, yeah, that was a bit different and got a decent score at the time. They give Toy Story 2 marks for visuals, sound, mastery, lifespan, and then a verdict. Visuals are colourful and solid, but a little fuzzy, betraying its PlayStation origins. Always a bit of console snobbery back then. Sounds are usual effects and that Randy Newman song, which is catchy enough. Mastery is just no pop-up or fog, competent 3D engine, but basic. Lifespan, nothing too taxing for experienced gamers. The final verdict is pleasant and surprisingly accomplished, and they give it 71%. So, not amazing, but a decent movie game for the time. Perfectly average way to spend a rainy afternoon if you were a kid back in January 2000, eh? This page in N64 Magazine issue 37 is having a look at Pokemon Snap, which was quite the novelty back then, a first-person photography game with Pokemon. It's billed as a point-and-click adventure, which is a bit of a stretch, really. The review talks about how Nintendo could have cashed in on the Pokemon craze, but actually tried to be innovative with this game, which is fair enough. It mentions Todd, the chap you play as, who is like Ash from the cartoon but with a camera instead of Pokeballs, going around Pokemon Island taking snaps for Professor Oak. There's a little section called Buggy Boy describing Todd's buggy, the ZEROONE vehicle, which sounds like a souped UP golf cart that can go on water and even hover later on, to get better pictures of Pokemon. Apparently there's a speed boost too. Another bit, quality control, is about how Dr. Oak scores your photos. He's a stickler for close-ups and having the Pokemon in the center, and he likes to see them doing something a bit different, like Meowth dancing. If your photos are rubbish, he'll tell you to try harder next time. Bit harsh, that oak. Then there's an info burst box with game details. Cart size is 128 megabits, one player only, cartridge save, no password, Rumble Pack is supported, but no expansion pack or transfer pack. It was out in America and Japan already, and due in March in the UK, costing £35 or $50, which sounds about right for a new N64 game back then. They mention it's a bit like on-rail shooters such as Knife Edge or Jet Force Gemini, but instead of shooting targets, you're taking photos of pocket monsters. They reckon it's a bit repetitive after a while, even with the lush forests and lakes, as there are only 63 Pokemon out of the 151 available in the game, which they consider a bit of a letdown. Still, Oak seems impressed by a Charizard photo in one of the screenshots, saying he'll be weak at the knees when he sees it. A bit dramatic, Oak, even for you. This page is a review of Pokemon Snap from back in January 2000 in N64 Magazine, so a good while ago now. It's titled Walking with Pokemon, which is a decent way to put it for a game where you're basically on a rail safari, taking pictures of Pokemon. They've broken down the review into sections with little headings like Coughing Attack, Flying Beasts, River Raid and Shock Tactic, each describing a different scenario in the game where you snap some Pokemon. There are screenshots showing Jigglypuff and Coughing, Pidgeotto and Pikachu, Poliwag and Psyduck, and Electabuzz. They seem to be focusing on the variety of Pokemon you can photograph in different environments. It mentions using items like apples and Pokeflutes to get better shots, which was a bit of a novelty at the time, trying to figure out how to trigger Pokemon reactions for better photos. Down the side, they have a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are totally original, packed with lovable 3D Pokemon, Pokemon Island is gorgeous, and hidden extras and bonuses to keep you going. Minuses are only 63 monsters, relatively few hours of actual game. 63 Pokemon felt like a decent number then, though compared to now it's tiny, isn't it? And few hours of actual game is probably fair, it was quite a short game really. There's an If You Like This section which recommends Pilotwings on the Nintendo 64, saying it's a quirky sky-based title with similar picture-taking missions. Yeah, I can see that both are quite laid back and about observation more than frantic gameplay. Warrings. They've given it a score breakdown too. Visuals get an 8, saying, the 3D versions of the various Pokemon are perfect. Sounds get a 7, twee tunes in the background and Pokemon yelling out front. Mastery gets a 6, impressive visually, but it's effectively a simple on-rail shooter. And Lifespan also gets an 8, it will eventually wear thin, but until then photographing monsters is compulsive. The overall verdict is innovative, challenging and guaranteed to bring a smile to your face, and it scores 80%. Pretty solid score I suppose for a game that was a bit different. It was a charming game. Pokemon Snap? Not exactly groundbreaking but certainly a fun and relaxing experience. This page of N64 Magazine is the Club 64 Feet section, aimed at us, N64 owners back in January 2000. It's got the usual monthly guide to help you get the most out of your games. The big headline is for Super Smash Bros, naturally given how much of a big deal that game was and still is to be honest. There's a screenshot of Donkey Kong in it, alongside Mario and Kirby on the page. They always did love their Smash Bros, didn't they? It says hints, tips and more secrets than you can shake a stick at, which is a bit much but alright. Then you've got the Club 64 mailbox, where readers can have their say, which is always a mixed bag. Next up is a how-to section for Smash Bros again, digging deeper into smashing them all in apparently. Followed by another how-to this time for WWF WrestleMania 2000, promising to unleash some whoopass, which sounds about right for wrestling games of that era, always a bit over the top. Tips extra is there for the latest releases, can't recall what was brand new back then, probably some filler games mostly. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is featured, with the question, what seems to be the problem then? Dr. Kit's will fix it. Bit cheeky of them. Game On asks, you want more challenges do you? Do you? Sounds like more of the usual magazine fodder to keep you busy. I'm the best section is there, talking about setting standards, probably high scores and stuff. Then, Skill Club 64 Feet says, boy it's getting crowded in here, but there's still room for plenty more. Sounds like a fan club type thing. Directory is listed for Christmas money spending, check here first. Bet that was full of games and accessories to tempt us to blow our cash. Kia. Finally, back issues and subscriptions at the back, with a picture of the N64 magazine itself, issue 36, with Donkey Kong and Matza on the cover. January 2000 at the bottom, so right at the turn of the millennium. Feels like a lifetime ago. This page is the Club 64 mailbox. In it, always a good bit in the mag, see what random stuff folks were writing in about. Right at the top there's the address and even an email address, futurenet.co.uk, remember those days? Facts number 2, proper business. Says the star letter gets a steering wheel with rumble effect. Blimey fancy. First up, a letter titled, Little Confused from David Clack in Kent. Seems he's heard Pikachu saying, "Is that you?" and thinks Woolworths are getting it wrong about Pikachu's vocabulary. Yeah, Pikachu just goes, Pika Pika mainly, doesn't it? Ed, the editor bloke, replies saying they've got a Pikachu toy in the office that says, Booyaka! And, this one goes out to all the Pokemon ladies. Bit of alright for a kid's magazine that. Tayu. Then there's a little ad for electronic Pokemon toys, assorted designs for kids aged 4 and up, £7.99. Even the ad's got Pikachu saying, "Is that you?" in a speech bubble. Clearly someone at Woolies thought that was his catchphrase. Next bit is Correction Corner. Always good for a laugh when they've messed up. First one, in the WWF Attitude Review, they called Callo Carlo, in a caption about his banana-shaped special. Daniel Vowles from Swindon picked that up. Ed's reply, even so, Callo's banana-shaped special was still a hit with the ladies. Cheeky. Another correction, in the Games for Life chart, Mario Kart is number 4, but the picture above it is Diddy Kong Racing, with Diddy and Whizpig. Richard Parks from Essex spotted that one. Ed's just says looks that way. Real helpful, Ed. Last correction, in the Game On section for GoldenEye, there are 2 GoldenEye challenges, but someone put the Gormless Guards picture with Tag Tournament, instead of just Gormless Guards. David Hartley from Preston again, eagle eyes on this bloke. Ed replies, will do, when hell freezes over that is, sarcastic git. Final correction is about Perfect Dark being slipped to April but still marked for December, in the Ultra release list. Andrew Cullen from London pointed that out. Ed's classic reply again, looks that way. Ed, he's phoning it in today. Strange thing is the next letter from James McDermott in Australia. Bit of a trek to write in. He's playing Shadowman, and collected 122 Dark Souls, but the game says there are only 120. Where did the extra 2 come from? Ed says early copies of Shadowman had 122, but the instruction booklet said 120. So there you go, early copies are a bit different. Butte, Ed, he says. Then there's Burgundy from Ruben Larson in Norway. Bit about Link's hair color in Zelda games. Brown in the first Zelda, green in Zelda 2, black in Zelda DX, and yellow-orange in Zelda 64 on the Nintendo 64. Wonders if it will be blue in the completed Gaiden and burgundy for Zelda on the Dolphin, which we know now as the GameCube. Ed reckons Autumn Rouge would be a better color and makes a joke about hair dye. Last letter is speechless. Someone was staying in a Forte post house in Bristol and saw Martin Kitts about to cross the road and was speechless. Alright then. There's a screenshot from Shadowman showing the 122 Dark Souls, and another one from Zelda DX on the Game Boy Color, proper retro that looks now. And that's page 86 from issue 37. Blast from the past. This page of Club 64 mailbox starts with a letter about a Pokemon download site idea for the 64DD, which is quite forward-thinking, considering back then we were still mostly swapping cartridges. Ed, the editor, seems to think it's interesting, in that typically understated way. There's another daft letter about being called Kitty Star in the street, which is a bit random. Then there's a longer one about the networked 64DD and the idea of a poker site. This reader gets what Nintendo were trying to do with the 64DD and reckons it could pave the way for online Pokemon, even mentioning Gold and Silver and the Dolphin, which we now know as the GameCube. Again, Ed agrees it's a good idea, especially for the Dolphin. Someone else, Bruce, has had a brainwave about headphones for Perfect Dark multiplayer on the N64, so each player can hear different sounds depending on where they are in the game. Not a bad shout actually, and Ed thinks it would be good for the Dolphin too, especially for shoot-'em-ups and even Mario Coupe. Imagine fighting Bowser with your own sound effects. That could be pretty cool. The last letter in the mailbox is a bit of a rant about a bloke in a game shop who apparently went crazy when asked about new N64 games. He went off on one about preferring 32 players on PC to better graphics and N64 games. Ed seems to find it a bit much. Below that we've got a section called Dream ON with game ideas. First up is Chat Show Bouncer 64, which sounds like you're directing a chaotic chat show, Jerry Springer style, and have to manage bouncers and out-of-control guests. Sounds a bit bonkers, and you get points for injuries apparently. Charming. Then there's Girlfriend Go-Go 64, described as a localized translation of one of those weird Japanese girlfriend simulators. You're a girlfriendless teenager, and have to chat up girls from your class with different personalities using the right lines. They even mention lines you might use outside M&W stores and petrol stations. Classy. Ed reckons it sounds better than a real girlfriend, with a touch of sarcasm. Probably because they can be a bit of work, can't they? There's a picture of one of these digital girlfriends looking a bit unimpressed with the guy's car, an XR2 apparently. Miserable old cow according to Ed. Bit harsh maybe. This page has got a bunch of reader letters at the start, typical mailbox stuff. Some bloke named Mike Rinko wants a year's supply of haggis, which is a laugh. Then there's a few asking about random stuff, and getting sarcastic answers back from Ed the editor like usual. One poor sod, Alex Howard, needs sedating apparently. Ronald Helyar's pondering the value of days, deep stuff for a games mag. Then there's a longer letter from someone in Leeds moaning about trying to find WWF Attitude. Apparently Acclaim lost the WWF license, and it was all a bit of a mess getting hold of the game back then. There's a screenshot of the game, looks alright for the time, proper blocky wrestlers like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock going at it. Below that, there's a bit called Castle or What, with a photo of a castle that Fred Riding reckons looks like something out of Zelda, maybe Ganondorf's place. The mag agrees it's a good likeness, even the houses around it look Zelda-ish. Right at the bottom it's, so tell me this, the questions section. Someone's asking about a Mickey Mouse game by Eurocom, using the world is not enough engine. They reckon it's a racing game called Mickey's Racing USA, coming out at Christmas, and comparing it to Zelda Gaiden. Another question is about Command & Conquer sequels on the N64, like Red Alert and Retaliation, and they mention Red Alert's already on the PlayStation. They say the first game sold well on N64, so maybe Nintendo might ask for another one. Warrington you. Then someone else is asking about 1080 Degrees 2, and how fast the Dolphins DVDs will load. Dolphin being the codename for the GameCube of course. They reckon 1080 Degrees 2 might not happen on the N64, and Dolphin games will load faster than CDs but slower than cartridges. Another reader wants to know about the transfer pack, and if the action replay is the same as the equalizer. Turns out the transfer pack is like a Game Boy pack for swapping info between N64 and Game Boy. They reckon the action replay and equalizer are similar for cheat codes, but action replay has a PC link. Lastly, someone's asking when ToeJam and Earl's coming out, and any news on Driver. They don't know when ToeJam and Earl is due, and for Driver they reckon Reflections were only just looking into making Driver 64, so not much happening there yet. All typical stuff you'd read in N64 Mag back then, keeping you in the loop about what was coming and answering daft questions. This page is from issue 37 of N64 Magazine, and it's all about how to smash 'em all in Super Smash Bros. On the N64. Right then, well, it was a bit of a craze at the time, wasn't it? They're saying they've been playing Smash Bros. In the office since February, which is ages before it properly came out here in the UK. Bit keen, weren't they? They reckon it's a revolutionary beat-em-up platformer, which is a bit much, but yeah, it was pretty good fun for a laugh. The main bit here is a how-to guide on getting the classic Mushroom Kingdom stage. Apparently it's a secret stage you unlock by completing the game on normal difficulty, with all 8 original characters, so not Donkey Kong, Captain Falcon, Luigi or Jigglypuff, then the secret ones as they call them. Live set to 3, carry on if you lose, no worries there. They've got some tips on the Mushroom Kingdom stage, like platforms in the middle that drop you if you stand on them too long, helpful. There's a POW block that pops up randomly that will wallop your opponents. Pipes that suck you in and spit you out somewhere else. And piranha plants to watch out for. Groundbreaking stuff really. Down in the corner there's a what we said bit, saying they gave Super Smash Bros. A 90% in issue 36. A truly original beat-em-up which offers unrivaled enjoyment. Well, it was alright I suppose. 90% seems a bit generous, but each to their own. It was a decent game to have a bit of a ruck in with your mates, I'll give them that. This page from the mag is all about secret bits and bobs in Super Smash Bros. On the N64, a game we all sunk hours into back then, didn't we? It's talking about unlocking bonus characters and costumes, which was always a bit of a thrill. First up, Captain Falcon, you had to slog through the single-player game in under 20 minutes to unlock him. Blimey, that sounds stressful now. Then there's Luigi, unlocked by completing bonus 1 mode with all the starting characters, and Falcon. Jigglypuff was a bit easier, just complete the game with anyone. And Ness, the Earthbound kid, required finishing the game on normal, without continues. Bit of a grind for Ness, wasn't he? But worth it for a bit of variety. They also mentioned Fancy Dress, which is just alternate costumes, tapping the C buttons at character select. Apparently Pikachu gets party hats, bless him. Down below there's a quick tips bit for Samus, Donkey Kong and Yoshi. Samus has charged shots and flame attacks, Donkey Kong's got his powered up punch and hand slap, and Yoshi's Egeating and hand slap are mentioned too. Standard stuff, but handy to have in the mag I suppose. GT. All in all, it's a useful little guide for getting the most out of Smash Bros back in the day. Remember poring over pages like this to get every last secret out of games? Simpler times. This page is all about tips for Nintendo 64 games, mainly focusing on Super Smash Bros., which was a massive game back then, wasn't it? Right at the top it's got Team 64's tips, and they're talking about Kirby and Pikachu. For Kirby, they're going on about how versatile he is, nicking other characters' moves, clever stuff. They mention the stone move, which is a classic, makes you invincible for a bit. Then there's the stone cutter and absorb moves, and they even list a load of abilities he can pinch from other fighters like Donkey Kong's Power Punch and Pikachu's Thunder Shock. Next up is Pikachu, and apparently, he's a mean fighting machine, who knew? They suggest using his Thunder Shock bolt to zap people jumping towards you and the speed dash for getting out of trouble. Seems solid advice actually. Then there's a bit on Fox McCloud, good old Slippy Toad's mate. They're highlighting his energy shield for bouncing back projectiles and his fire punch which you can direct. Useful to know, I suppose. Good old Slippy Toads. Good old Slippy Toads. Finally, there's a section on Pokemon, specifically the Pokeball item in Smash Bros. It says it randomly chucks out a Pokemon to help you out, or maybe hinder you if you're unlucky. They mention Beedrill, Blastoise, Chansey, Charizard, Clefable, and, hilariously, Magikarp, who apparently just flops about uselessly. Sums Magikarp up perfectly, really. There's also a little box about getting extra points by taunting just before you KO someone. A bit cheeky, but every point counts, eh? All good stuff for anyone who was hammering away at Smash Bros back in the day. This page, then, is having a look at Super Smash Bros on the N64. Right, so we're getting a breakdown on Link and Mario, the two mainstays really. For Link, they're running through his sword spin, bombs and boomerang moves, all pretty standard stuff if you played him. Apparently his sword attacks are quick, which is handy. Then for Mario, it's his punch spin and fireball. Again, nothing too surprising there. Easy to pick up moves for a default character like Mario, just like in Mario Kart they say. Tussie. Then there's a bit about getting extra points, things like Butterfly, Heavy Damage, Pacifist Award, Yoshi Rainbow and DK Perfect. All these daft little challenges to get more points in the game, you know the sort of thing. Lastly, it mentions Pokemon popping up, like Coughing spraying gas, Meowth chucking coins, Onix dropping rocks, Starmie shooting rays, and Mew being super rare and only showing up when you've unlocked all the secret characters, because of course it is. Just a quick guide to some of the basics and hidden bits in Smash Bros really. This page from an old N64 magazine is all about how to get good at WWF WrestleMania 2000. It's got a big headline about unleashing whoop-ass, which is a bit much, isn't it? But there you go. It's a feature, looks like a how-to guide for the game. They reviewed it in issue 36 and gave it a massive 90% and a Star Game Award. Highly impressive, they reckoned, and a good alternative to Acclaim's WWF Attitude. Remember Attitude on the PlayStation? That was alright, but WrestleMania 2000 was definitely a step up on the N64. Cleaner looking for sure. They've got a What We Said section, which is just quoting their review, then some things to remember tips. Standard stuff like stolen moves, yeah, that was a thing, wasn't it? Press A and B for the stolen strike. Then countouts and double teaming, all with little screenshots showing the game in action. Graphics are a bit blocky now, but back then it looked pretty decent on the telly. Weapons is in there too, battering your opponent with stuff from ringside. Always fun, wasn't it? For beginner's choice, they're recommending The Rock. Plenty of varied moves, apparently, and a fan favorite to boot. Can't argue with that. The Rock was pretty much everywhere back then. They suggest checking the fighting styles chart too. Nah yeah. All in all, just a typical tips page from back in the day, telling you how to get the most out of your wrestling game. Good times. WrestleMania 2000 was a laugh with a few mates around. This page in the magazine is all about fighting styles in what must be WWF WrestleMania 2000 on the N64. It's breaking down how to play, depending on whether you're a bit of a coward, aggressive, or a showboater type of gamer. Right then. So, if you're a bit cowardly, apparently blokes like Dude Love and Cactus Jack are your go-to wrestlers. The advice is to be sneaky, get in cheap shots, and run away a lot. Classic cowardly tactics really. They're suggesting you lure your opponent out of the ring for a count-out win. Proper cheesy stuff. Lenini. For the aggressive players, they're saying Big Show and Kane are your men. Here, it's all about getting stuck in, using quick grapples and pummeling your opponent relentlessly. Apparently, aggressive players don't block much, so you should just go all out with running moves and strong grapples to really dish out the damage. Finally, for the showboaters, they've got Shamrock, Road Dogg and X-Pac listed. This style is for the flashy players who love to taunt and do all the big moves for the crowd. The advice here is to weaken your opponent with basic moves, and then unleash the special trademark moves and aerial assaults to really get the crowd going. They even mention the lumbar smash as a prime example, which sounds rather painful, doesn't it? Orally. It's all a bit of fun really, isn't it? Trying to put these over-the-top wrestling styles into game terms. Back then we lapped it up though, didn't we? Anything to get an edge in the playground smack talk about who's the best at the wrestling games. This page in Club 64 is all about wrestling games on the N64, proper lad stuff. In it, it's got a feature called 5 of the best moves from different wrestlers. They're saying there are over 40 wrestlers in these games, which was a big deal back then. First up is The Rock, with his smash and grab move. It's described as an easy 2-hit combo, headlock into a punch, good for beginners apparently. Then there's X-Pac and his jumping spinning back kick. They mention careful timing and a slight delay, saying if it's blocked, you're open to a counterattack. Sounds risky but flashy, like X-Pac himself. Next is The Undertaker, showing off a body splash to grapple. Useful, they say, and you can go straight into a double-handed lifting chokehold from it. Bit morbid, bit Undertaker, you know? Then it's Big Show, with his wishbone, and the Big Show thump. Wishbone sounds like a submission move, and the thump is described as just cruel, and involves a strong grapple and a wham! One last hit. Bit over the top, just like Big Show. Wham! Finally, Stone Cold Steve Austin is there with his running clothesline and back body flip. The clothesline is called an easy knockdown maneuver. Classic Stone Cold. The back body flip is described as up, over and down, needing a super grapple and then lifting them over your head. Proper showman stuff. So yeah, it's a page highlighting some of the flashier moves from the big names in wrestling games back in the day on the N64. Good memories of button mashing and trying to pull off these moves with your mates. Good times, good times. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 37, is all about getting the upper hand in a couple of games, WCW Mayhem and Gauntlet Legends. WCW Mayhem, blimey, I remember that one. It was a wrestling game, like there weren't enough of them at the time, eh? This page is chucking out cheat codes for it. Unlock everyone using PLYHDNGYSS, infinite stamina with PRNTSTMNS, all those sort of things. There's even one to play as Billy Kidman, remember him? NGGDYNLYN, they reckon. Right then. And you can fight backstage apparently using CBCKRMS. Sounds about right for a wrestling game. Brawling everywhere. Warrington. Then there's Gauntlet Legends. Now that was more like it, a proper dungeon crawler. They are giving tips on how to unlock characters like Taurus, the Summoner, Falconess and Jackal, collecting coins and hitting bonus stages and all that. Seems like there's a hidden trapdoor in the castle level for the Summoner. They're also telling you how to fight faster, gobble extra fruit, and upgrade your characters and weapons. Good old Gauntlet, always a bit of button bashing fun with your mates. Happy days. This page from the magazine, right, it's all about cheat codes for a few N64 games. Classic stuff back then. Warrenin. First up we've got Hot Wheels Turbo Racing. Remember that one? Slightly bonkers cars flying around. They've got a password and loads of button combos for things like infinite turbos, unlocking everything, mirror tracks, night racing, all the usual cheat suspects. There's even a wireframe mode, which sounds a bit trippy. Warringtonal. Then it's Road Rash 64. Now that was a laugh, wasn't it? Bashing people off bikes with chains and stuff. They've got a shortcut guide for one of the levels, and tips for staying on your bike when you get knocked off, as well as more codes to unlock all bikes and tracks. Turbo boost at the start of a race. Sounds handy. And there's something called Cop Mode and Scooter Mode, which I can't quite remember now, but probably added to the chaos. Lastly, there's a classic tip for IS-98, International Superstar Soccer. Everyone was well into that at the time. Apparently you could play as world stars by entering a code, and there's also a big heads mode, which sounds typically daft. And if you really rinse the game, winning the International Cup on the harder levels unlocks more heads for creator player. Always good for a laugh, those weird faces. This page is all about readers' top tips for N64 games. Classic stuff back then, you know, proper cheat codes and sneaky tricks. Right at the top, tip number 1 is for Premier Manager 64. Seems a bit cheeky, buying all the best players in a 4-player game all to yourself. Then we've got Quake 2, messing with the timer and health settings, sounds handy for those tougher levels. Micro Machine 64 Turbo gets a mention for pausing and pressing buttons for something, probably extra speed or weapons. Those games were always frantic. Key. Banjo-Kazooie is in there, something about hitting a door with rat-a-tat move. Remember that bear and bird duo? Duke Nukem, 0 Hour, always a bit of fun blowing up aliens. This tips for moving faster. GoldenEye 007, of course, highlighting cheats from folders. Bit complicated, that one sounds. Revolt, unlocking tracks by entering Carnival as your name. Nice and simple cheat. Zelda, Wind Waker I think, getting Link to fly over chests. Magic! Turok 2, teleporting trick in deathmatch. Monster Truck Madness, a password for crazy textures. JMPNG, got it. FIFA 99, punching the keeper with a friend and not getting sent off. Proper naughty but fun. Mario Kart 64. Rainbow Road banana trick to slow down opponents. Always good to get one up on your mates. Tonic Trouble. Making sure you have a controller pack inserted to carry over your energy levels. Essential for long games. WWF Warzone. Extra costumes by pressing all the C buttons and A. Might not work for everyone though, they say. Finally, Diddy Kong Racing. Watching CPU opponents struggle on loops in adventure mode for a laugh. Sounds a bit mean, but we've all done it. Mercow. There's a form at the bottom to send in your own tips to Tips Extra, with space for your game name, effect, and code. If you get Cheat of the Month, you get something extra special, probably a pin badge back then. It's got address details for sending tips in. Proper old school mail-in sort of thing. Yeah, classic page of N64 tips. Takes you back, doesn't it? This page from N64 Magazine, it's Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. Proper old school stuff if you remember that. It's basically the problem page for us gamers back in the day. Warrington Norsa? So, some bloke called Simon from Dorset is having trouble with Whizpig on Diddy Kong Racing, always getting trounced. Dr. Kit, bless him, tells him to take his finger off the accelerator before hitting a zipper or blue balloon to get a speed boost. Something to do with the exhaust turning rainbow coloured and all that. Sounds like a bit of a faff, but that's racing games for you. Warra? Then there's Jeffrey from Kent, stuck on Jet Force Gemini, missing ship parts after beating Mizar. Apparently the parts are in Vela's underwater lodge and Mizar's palace. Typical Rare Games, hidden bits everywhere. Michael from York is struggling with a 1080 degrees on Nintendo's 1080 degrees snowboarding. Dr. Kitts gets all fired up saying, "Can't isn't a word," and tells him to turn sharply left on the halfpipe and tap jump. Sounds easy enough, but 1080 was a bit tricky back then. Whoa. Finally, Daniel from Lancaster wants to know if you can have two guns at once in GoldenEye. Dr. Kitts confirms the rumor, saying you need two pairs of weapons, and to use some button combo involving A and Z button twice, then A and Z, and then tapping Z. Always was a bit fiddly getting that to work, but looked cool when you pulled it off. At the bottom, there's a little form for sending in your own gaming queries to Dr. Kitts. Proper pen and paper job, you had to cut it out and post it off. No emailing back then, of course. Those were the days. Getting your gaming advice from the magazine doctor. This page has a feature called Game On, which is about 8 challenges to test the best players. It looks at a few different games and sets some tricky tasks for readers to try at home. Guy test the best First the best. Someone named Ronald Helyat from Glasgow came up with this one. It's all about picking up a box in Bomb Bomb Battlefield and trying to carry it all the way to the top of the mountain without jumping. Sounds like a right pain in the backside, especially with Mario being as slow as he is. Apparently if you can manage it using only the Mario camera view, you get a gold medal. There's also a mention of medals for using the Lakitu cam and for drops, whatever they are. Chaturn. Next, it's Mario Kart 64 with Block Fort Derby. This one's from Kieran Richardson of Surrey. It's a 4-player battle on Block Fort where you grab a weapon each and then race around the track in reverse for 3 laps. It's a race to see who can finish all 3 laps first, even if you fall off the track or get blown up. They're handing out medals for wins depending on whether you come first, second or third. Sounds like a laugh with mates, probably end up in arguments as usual. Then there's Duke Nukem 0 Hour with a challenge called Duke Duck Shoot. This one's from Stephen Linham from Milton Keynes, who they're calling the Master Sniper. It's a 4-player game on the Castlemania level. You have to use the sniper rifle in a first-floor window and try to shoot 10 arses. Their words, not mine, of your mates as they run around the courtyard. They're giving out medals depending on which zoom and sight mode you use on the sniper rifle. X2, X4, and X8. A bit cheeky, but Duke Nukem was always a bit like that, wasn't it? Boon. Finally, there's Rogue Squadron with Kamikaze. Lee Morrison of Dundee is behind this one. Apparently, he's got a brain for Star Wars games. You have to use cheat codes IGIVEUP and DEADDACK, minus very subtle, those cheat names, and then try to complete the rendezvous level on Barkesh by crashing into an enemy ship. The extra challenge is to keep all 5 transport ships intact while you're doing it. Medals are up for grabs depending on which craft you use, YWing/speeder, AWing, or XWing/VWing. Sounds like a good way to waste some Imperial scum. This page from the mag, it's challenges to test the best in Club 64. Right at the top we've got Zelda 64, or Ocarina of Time as proper gamers call it. It's a challenge sent in by Alex Calling from Newcastle. Bless him. Apparently you have to warp to the island near Lakeside Laboratory as young Link, and shoot those floating guy things with arrows. 40 arrows max, using Z targeting of course, and you get ranked on how many you can down. Bronze, silver, gold medals, the usual. Then there's F1 World Grand Prix, remember that? David Johnson from Portsmouth came up with this one, F1 football. Smash your cars into each other to knock a rubbery ring around and into a goal. Sounds a bit daft, but I suppose back then we were easily amused. Again, medals for goals scored. Rikichu. GoldenEye 007 next, Wicker Wild West. Sam Ramford from Falmouth came up with this one, making a cowboy shootout in License to Kill on the temple level. Pistols only, stand back to back, count to 3 and duel it out. Last man standing wins each round, and you play 5 rounds in total. Medals for wins, naturally. Lastly, Beetle Adventure Racing. Peter Lynch from County Wexford sent this Road Rages challenge in. 2-player game, flip a coin to see who's it. The it player has to complete 3 laps without being touched by the other Beetle, only using accelerate and brake. Medals for collisions or lack thereof. Down at the bottom it's that game on bit, asking for your weird and wonderful ways to play games. Thereafter challenges for Jet Force Gemini, Quake 2, Duke Nukem 0 Hour, and Shadowman in particular. If they like yours, you get a prized N64 pin badge, and they want you to send them in to their Bath address. Remember writing letters? Ancient times, eh? This page is all about proving you're the best gamer, proper old school bragging rights stuff. They're running these I'm the best competitions, and reckon they'll see how good you are. Bit cheeky, aren't they? There's a star performance bit for Mario Golf. Some bloke called Chris Flormer from Suffolk apparently unlocked Metal Mario, Mario Golf's elusive secret character. He's gotten a birdie badge on all 108 holes, and even claims a hole-in-one on the Chain Chomp hole. Blimey. They're sending him a joypad for that, Dua. Then there's new high score for Mario Golf, as well. Last issue they wanted times for the Toad Highlands course, and some chap called Rob Pierce from Salisbury did the whole course in 10 minutes 11 seconds, and 5/100ths of a second, which they say is impressive. He's getting a joypad too. Lucky blighters. This month's time to beat is Donkey Kong 64. Seems some fella called Mark is a DK expert, and they want you to beat his score of 163 on the Rambi Arena subgame, accessible from the mystery menu after collecting 6 fairies. If you beat it, you win a joypad. Joypads galore in this magazine. Then you've got tables of high scores for Mario Golf, Toad Highlands, Cooper Park, Shy Guy Desert, Boo Valley, Mario Star, and Yoshi's Island are all there. People have been sending in their times for each course. Looks like Gary Carney and Dan Jones are doing pretty well in Mario Golf, seeing their names all over the place, and Richard Clark from Suffolk too. Warrington Noah. And right at the bottom, a bit out of place, is Quake 2 scores. Strog Outpost, Orbital Defense, Central Complex, Intelligence Center, Comms Center, Docking Station, Strog Freighter, and Cargo Bay. All Quake 2 levels. David Park from Tyne and Ware seems to be dominating there, with Andrew Mills from Dundee nipping at his heels. They're listing fastest times for all these levels. So yeah, basically a page for showing off your gaming skills and trying to win a joypad. Good luck to them, I say. This page then is all about games nicking ideas from films, which back in the N64 days wasn't exactly a new thing, but they're having a bit of a laugh about it here. It's called Games on Film, funnily enough, and it's all about how N64 games are packed with references to famous films. They start off by mentioning old Shigeru Miyamoto and Donkey Kong, saying it borrowed a fair bit from King Kong, enough to get Nintendo in a bit of legal bother with MGM back in the day apparently, and now, ref forward. Then it talks about how developers are still at it, filling games with nods to films. They mention Zelda 64, Lilac Wars, which was Star Fox 64 here in Blighty of course, and Resident Evil 2 as examples of games with these film-like moments. Apparently these games are getting better at making these references more obvious, less of a subtle wink and more of a slap in the face as they put it. Down at the bottom there's a key to scores, which is a bit of a laugh. It's like a rating system for how obvious the film references are. 1 out of 5 is barely noticeable, going up to 5 out of 5, which is bring on the lawyers. Right then, very amusing. So basically they are going to be looking at some N64 games and rating them on how much they've borrowed from the silver screen. Fair enough, I suppose. This page is titled Games on Film by Mark Green, and it's a bit of a look at movie tie-in games, back when they were often a bit ropey, weren't they? First up we have Lilac Wars. Now they're saying it's based on Independence Day, which is a bit of a stretch. The game bit they describe sounds more like Star Fox 64, what with Fox McCloud and Peppy Hare getting a pasting from robots, and Peppy rabbiting on about your dad. Independence Day was all about Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum, wasn't it? Not really seeing the connection, but hey ho. Robot. Then there's Independence Day itself. They are showing a pyramid getting blown up, which I don't recall from the film, but the White House getting nuked? Yeah, that's Independence Day, alright, proper blockbuster stuff. Warrington. Next we have Star Trek, the motion picture. Ah, Vega. Remember that? Bit of a weird one, that film. All about a massive space probe. The game sounds like you're getting battered by a robot, and the film bit they mention is Kirk and Spock figuring out Voyager is actually Voyager 1. Deep stuff for a video game tie-in. Kakagi. Finally, we have Star Wars. Return of the Jedi to be precise. They're talking about Peppy Hare again, which is odd, as Peppy is not in Star Wars. They mention Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is more like it for Star Wars. The game bit described is about a pitched battle, and Peppy talking to McCloud. It's all very muddled, isn't it? The film bit is classic Return of the Jedi, with Obi-Wan chatting to Luke about Vader, and Lando blowing up the Death Star. Good times. It gets a cinema reel rating of 3 out of 5, which is probably fair enough for a movie tie-in game back then. They were never amazing, were they? This page is a trip down memory lane, alright. It's got a section called Games on Film, and they're comparing N64 games to films. A bit tenuous if you ask me, but hey, it's the year 2000. First up is The Legend of Zelda. Ocarina of Time, naturally everyone was still banging on about that back then. They've paired it with Superman 2i. The game bit they're highlighting is the fight with Dark Link in a mirror room, which was quite clever at the time, I suppose. The film comparison is about a bad Superman. A bit stretched, isn't it? Then there's Return of the Jedi compared with something in Zelda, where Link says goodbye to Saria on a bridge. Not sure I remember that being particularly filmic, but okay, Matt. Next they've got Terminator 2 and Zelda again. This time it's the Windmill episode and the Song of Storms. They're saying the film is about Cyberdyne, learning from the T-1000. Bit of a reach again, but hey, it's a magazine feature. Joriswam. Moving on to Turok 1 and 2, they've got Jurassic Park first, talking about dinosaurs naturally. They mention raptors and double-barreled shotguns. The film bit is Muldoon saying, clever girl. Fair enough, dinosaurs are dinosaurs. Nolku. Then it's The Lost World, and in the game you're riding a Stegosaurus. Film comparison is Evil Pete Postlethwaite. They mention petrified mutants and nets. Sounds like standard Turok fare really. Aliens is next. Game bit is alien eggs, and the Queen Mantid, dropping babies. Charming. Film is Ripley finding the source of everyone's problems. Yeah, Aliens was properly scary back then. Ryua. The Long Kiss Goodnight is paired with Turok again, mentioning dynamite mushrooms and a machine gun / ice moment. Film bit is about Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson. Sounds a bit random, this whole film comparison thing. Wait. Then there's Duke Nukem, 0 Hour. Planet of the Apes is the first comparison. They're talking about the Statue of Liberty being half buried. The game is about Duke in downtown New York fighting apes. They think it's meaningful. Bit much, isn't it? Then Titanic. Game bit is exploring a ship and finding a vintage car. Film bit is Rose and Jack in a car on the Titanic. Bit of romantic behavior apparently. Yeah, Titanic. Everyone was obsessed with that film for a while. Make. Aliens again, this time for Duke Nukem. They're talking about spider-like creatures and facehuggers. Film is facehuggers, breaking free. Duke and aliens, always a good mix. Gunnix. Finally, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Game is minecarting and shooting guards. Film is Dr. Jones and his comedy entourage. Minecart chase is breathtaking, they say. Indiana Jones classic films. Hey. So yeah, that's the page. A bit of a strange mix of films and games, and they're stretching the comparisons a bit thin in places, but it's what they did back then, wasn't it? Good memories of some of those N64 games, those Zelda, Turok, Duke Nukem, those were the days. This page then, it's all games on film, isn't it? Looking back at the N64 trying to muscle in on the movie hype. We're kicking off with Shadow Man, and they're making a big deal about its Sen 7 on vibe, all dark and gritty New York. Then there's GoldenEye, obviously. They're banging on about the Statue Park level, which I vaguely remember, and Sean Bean being a right villain, just like the film, naturally. Next up is Silence of the Lambs, which sounds a bit grim for a game, doesn't it? Apparently you're playing as Avery Marks, whoever he is, in Buffalo Bill's house, using night vision goggles. Blimey. Then Jacob's Ladder. Never heard of a game of that, but it's based on the film apparently, and has something to do with teddy bears and demons. Sounds a bit odd. An American Werewolf in London gets a mention. Set in the London Underground, with Jack the Ripper thrown in for good measure. Bit of a mashup. In it, Down the side we've got Armorines, linking to Starship Troopers, talking about brain bugs and flare-pumping aliens and all sorts. And then bizarrely King Kong, with a scientist getting carried off by a giant bug in a silo. Not quite the monkey on the Empire State Building, is it? Worrying. Flipping back to GoldenEye again, they're really milking this one, aren't they? There's the facility level with the bottling room, and Aramov. Then another bit about GoldenEye where Sean Bean cops it, apparently shouting, "Do it for England, James," before he goes down. Bit dramatic. And lastly, another GoldenEye snippet, this time about Bond wasting guards outside a hut, riding a motorbike and jumping on a plane. Sounds a bit far-fetched even for Bond if you ask me. Still, GoldenEye, it was a laugh back then, wasn't it? This page in N64 Magazine is all about what's coming up. Big news is, South Park Rally looks like Acclaim reckon it's a brilliant racer, which is always a bit of a bold claim, isn't it? They're promising a full review, showing off all the characters, tracks and tactics, so if you're into that sort of thing I suppose keep an eye out. It's got old Cartman plastered all over it with shades on, looking like he's ready for Daytona or something. Also reviewed in this issue we've got Top Gear Rally 2, which I remember was alright. Another racer, of course, the N64 was drowning in them at times. And then Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness, which was Konami trying to keep the Belmonts going on the 64. Wasn't quite Symphony of the Night, was it? But still, Castlevania. And looking ahead to next month in Planet Game Boy, it seems they'll be covering things like Dragon Warrior Monsters. Always good to see some proper role-playing on the old Game Boy. Plus there's Marble Madness, which is a classic, even if it is just rolling a ball around. Then something called Billy Bob's Hunting and Fishing, and Ready to Rumble Boxing looks like a bit of a mixed bag for the handheld next month. This page of Planet 64, issue 38 it is, looks like it's all about getting more out of your N64. Right at the top, they're banging on about Donkey Kong 64 again. Seems like everyone was obsessed with that monkey back then. More bananas, more fairies, more everything it says. Bit much if you ask me, but fair play if you like collecting stuff I suppose. In the latest news section they're teasing Perfect Dark, Zelda Gaiden and Shadow Man 2. Perfect Dark, yeah, that was the spiritual successor to GoldenEye, everyone was hyped for that. Zelda Gaiden, that's Majora's Mask for us lot in the know, they called it Gaiden back then for some reason. Sounded a bit Japanese anime if you ask me. And Shadow Man 2, the first one was alright, a bit dark and spooky, seemed to be trying to be a bit edgy. Deng. Then, reviewed, we've got EPGA Golf, Top Gear Hyperbike, and Asteroids. Golf game, bike game, space shooter, a bit of a mixed bag there, something for everyone I guess. They reckon it's all on sale Tuesday the 25th of January, so that pins it down to the start of the year 2000. And get this, absolutely free. Double game guide, with Castlevania 64 and Premier Manager 64. Castlevania 64, that was Konami trying to bring their vampire hunting to 3D, it was a bit clunky to be honest, but had its moments. Premier Manager 64, Corey's. Football management on the N64, that's a niche one, isn't it? Probably for the hardcore footy fans who wanted to manage their team on their Nintendo. Then there's a list of what's inside. First news on games, tips and cheats, reviews of Japanese and US games, some Skill Club 64 feet thing, loads of prizes, and they reckon they're the only reviews you can trust. Cheeky sods. All in all, looks like a typical issue, plenty to keep you going until the next one dropped. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 37, takes me right back. 2000. Simpler times, eh? It's got a feature article titled, Forsaken 64 with Martin Kitts, under the Wish You Were Here banner, which is their retro section I guess. The article is about the game Forsaken, which he says was the first Star Wars game he reviewed for the N64. He mentions it didn't exactly fly off the shelves despite his enthusiasm, which is a bit of a downer, isn't it? He says dusting off the cart reveals a game that still looks good, and doesn't have much competition in the N64 shoot-'em-up scene. He goes on about the tricky controls and piloting a Pion cycle around mazes, solving puzzles and fighting enemies from all angles. Sounds like a bit of a handful to control, typical N64 sometimes. He mentions a boss called Nutter, which gave him nightmares, a tiny fast killing machine. He talks about revisiting the game and having to buy another copy to get reacquainted with it. Sounds like he's got a bit of a soft spot for it despite the tricky bits. Then, on the right-hand side, there's an index for the issue. Let's see what's in here. Right at the top is an ear to the ground. On page 25, must be some news bit. Armorines review. On page 72, I vaguely remember Armorines. Wasn't amazing, was it? Back issues. Always trying to flog the old mags. Castlevania 2 preview. Ooh, Castlevania, now that's more like it, page 20. Directory on 114, Dr. Kitts. Maybe Martin Kitts himself has a column on page 103, EPGA Golf Preview, an Evil Knievel GB Review, Fighting Force Review, Game On, Games on Film, Harvest Moon 64 Preview, How to Go Bananas in Donkey Kong 64, How to Smash 'em All in Smash Bros, How to Unleash Some Whoopus in WWF WrestleMania 2000. Blimey, they crammed it all in, didn't they? There's I'm the Best, Information Station, ISS Millennium, Special Investigation, Letters, Mario Party 2 Preview, Missile Command GB Review, NBA Jam 2000 Review, New Goods next month, Nuclear Strike Future Look, Planet Game Boy, Pokemon Snap Review, Ready 2 Rumble Review, Ridge Racer 64 Preview, Ronaldo v Football GB Review, Skill Club 64, South Park Rally Preview, Top Gear Rally 2 Future Look, Welcome to N64, Wish You Were Here, and Worms Armageddon GB Review and Zelda Gaiden Preview. Phew! That's a lot of games mentioned in one issue. Looks like a packed issue. Something for everyone back then, eh? And at the bottom it says, this issue on sale Monday the 20th of December, and next issue on sale Tuesday the 25th of January. So a good chunk of games covered in this issue, a real snapshot of what was going on with the N64 at the time,